Howdy, I'm Kate Kavanaugh, and you're listening to the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast, where we're laying the groundwork for our land, ourselves, and for generations to come by looking at the way every thread of life is connected to one another. Communities above ground mirror the communities below the soil, which mirror the vast community of the cosmos. As the saying goes, as above, so below. Join me as we take a curious journey into agriculture, biology, history, spirituality, health, and so much more. I can't wait to unearth all of these incredible topics alongside you. Hello, and welcome to the Mind, Body, and Soil /Groundwork podcast. I am your host, Kate Kavanaugh, and on this podcast, we explore the threads of what it means to be humans woven into this earth. And I think that my guest today is an exemplar of that. I think that the work that she is doing in her region and bioregion and her incredible ability to articulate it is, this was a balm for my soul to record this episode with our guest, Tabitha Rose from Skin Fancy. And I'll say really fast for listeners, if you are listening on the day that this comes out, which is the 29th of April, or the 30th, Tabitha is having a birthday sale, and that code is birthday41. It'll be 20% off. And so I want to say that really quickly. Tabitha, I knew there was something incredible about Tabitha in my online interactions with her. And then over the past few months, we had the opportunity to share DMs, to share a Zoom call and some tea. And I was really struck at her ability to navigate life with a sense of magic and intentionality and just real grit also. And I think that she shares so much in this episode around business ownership and around motherhood and around the wild places that life takes us that we could never anticipate and never expect, and how to work within that to bring ourselves just a sense of wonder, to make space for us to unfold in that. And so I'm just thrilled to have her on the show. Tabitha also has an incredible skincare line that is mostly sourced from her garden and her local bioregion in the Pacific Northwest. And you'll hear us talk a lot about that, as we've talked so much about what it means to use resources closer to home to build our businesses. And I think that Tabitha is really a leader in the space of what it means to do just that. And I can tell you that I've been using her magic antioxidant serum and her hydrosols. I know that right now she has a spring hydrosol nettle and fir tip that I cannot wait to try. And her day dew for a while, and I just find it to be as glowing and as magical and as moisturizing and as embracing as the woman herself. So I highly recommend that you try these. I just really deeply admire this human, and I think that you will too. This is a longer episode, and I think it's actually just a first part, because if you're like me, there will be so much more that you want to hear from the incredible Tabitha Rose of Skin Fancy Company. And there are tons of links in the show notes about how to find Tabitha, and I do encourage you to seek her out. With that, I just want to get on with the show with a generous thanks to our sponsor, Redmond Real Salt, which you can get 15% off in the show notes. And there are ways to support the podcast in there too, and I would love to have your support. This is a bit of an inflection point for me in my life, and so If you would like to support the podcast, go to the show notes to find my Patreon, my Substack. And without further ado, here is the absolutely magical and intentional and beautiful Tabitha Rose.
So I've been dreaming of distilling nettles for a while, and I had a few days, in the forecast of dry weather. And when you distill, you definitely want a good handful of days of like mild, dry weather. You want the highest, you know, quantities of volatile oils in the plants. You want to
Mm,
harvest at peak times in
sure.
the season, but also in the day.
Yeah.
And and so I had it all planned out. I had my still like ready, cleaned, my whole distillation area prepped. And on Saturday morning, I guess on Saturday morning, Sunday morning. Anyway, woke up and to at about 3 in the morning to rain, which means distillation is put off. Like
Yeah.
so when it rains, essentially the waters come and they sort of like dilute the volatility of
Yeah.
the plants. And so that was just a whole thing. I'd even like posted about it on Instagram, which I'm so ridiculous about posting, like next to never. And I was like, I'm going to be distilling, water emoji, which was another embarrassing little story, side note, anecdote. Um, but so yeah, I woke up and it was raining and the distillation was off. And for me, that also means there's potential to not distill again until the next time we have a span of a few dry days.
Yeah.
And so that was, not just disappointing, but also a good reminder that that's the nature of what I do. I have to be really flexible. I have to be really in tune with the seasons, with the weather, and to be completely um, willing to just work with nature and to not
Yeah.
rush anything. And so, yeah, so it was a really good lesson. I can plan as much as I want. I can be completely prepared and ready. And if I wake up and it's not going to happen that morning, it's not going to happen. And so, yeah, it was just a good lesson in being less fixed in my nature, which
Mm.
I'm a Taurus. And so sometimes I just can dig in and
I'm a Capricorn. I might also
okay,
know
yeah,
how to dig in.
yeah, yep.
Yeah.
And I like to bend things to my will if possible occasionally,
Oh, yeah.
um and so I think it's a wonderful uh practice for me to just be more flexible and fluid when especially with distilling. And I think it's for me, distilling is of all of the herbal practices or formulation work that I do, it is the work that forces me to be the most, I guess, in tune with nature and in tune with the seasons and like transmutable and just flexible. I keep
Mm.
using that word, but I think it's really poignant here because you can't rush it,
Mm-mm.
like I can harvest time at its peak season and then dry it and use it for the next year whenever I feel like it in a formulation. But when I'm distilling, I can only harvest time in its peak season, in its peak hours, and
Yeah.
distill it on a day that it lends itself to being, ideal weather for the distillation. And if it's not, and I've done this before where I was like, I just really want to get this distillation done, you can feel it in the waters, you can feel it in the final product, and you can feel the rushed nature. You can feel it just doesn't have the vibrancy that it
Yeah.
might had I just been patient and listened and gone inward a little bit and said, that's okay. There's other things I can do. And there's
Mm.
so many other beautiful hydrosols out there in the world. Like so many of my clients are waiting patiently or not so patiently for the next distillation. And I'm like, it's okay. They might, find it somewhere else. And that's actually really wonderful. There's not enough people out there distilling, in my opinion. And so
Mm.
yeah, it's a lesson in just being a lot less fixed in my nature this weekend.
Yeah. I have so many questions, but I want to start with I was thinking recently. how many times a day I have to check the weather and that it won't stay in my brain for some reason, right? I'm
Mm.
really good at
Hmm.
remembering things, but I'll look at the weather and it'll just kind of go in one ear and out the other.
Yeah.
And I was thinking how tied we are to the weather, that this is something that we are meant to sense and meant to feel and meant to
Hmm.
check in with many times each day. And I
Yes.
was wondering if there's a reason that I have no ability to recollect what the weather is supposed to do in coming days, because it is something that is bringing you into presence.
Hmm.
And you explained that so beautifully, and I think that we live in a world where we're so often disconnected, right? We have a house and we're insulated from this thing weather, and
Right.
keep coming back to a quote in a couple of episodes now, and this woman, I can find it, but she says the weather is our life, right? Like, this is our life. When people
Hmm.
say they don't want to make small talk about the weather, I'm always surprised because
Oh boy. Yes.
the weather is everything.
Yes.
And so I was just thinking about that as you spoke about that, and to do work that is time and place dependent, time and place
Hmm.
and weather, and
Yeah.
yeah, and then also within your own family and your time and place and space to
Hmm.
commit to this process of many different things, but in this instance, in distillation.
Yeah. Well, and I think when you were talking about that, about mostly being insulated from it, it brought me back to just even our last, our last life in my family. I feel like our different homes are sort of our different stages of life. And
Mhm,
our last home, we were very insulated from the weather. We could just flip a button or a switch and the gas stove would come on.
mhm,
And I could, create the perfect lighting to recreate like a nice summer sunset evening, create a vibe that I needed maybe in the middle of winter, or walk to a coffee shop, to get a sense of community. And living out here, I've never been so in tune with the seasons by necessity.
yeah,
And I didn't, gardening, I think, beginning my journey of just, exploring planting some things and utilizing them. I've always been sort of a utilitarian gardener up until recently. I was like,
I
well,
like
this
that.
is this is kind of what I need and what can I use it for? And I think I started out with like carrots because I wanted to feed my daughter some carrots, and that was fun. And so we grew some tomatoes and just building and building and building. And now I'm to the point where I want to see flowers because they make me happy and because the bees love them, like specifically cosmos. I want to plant all of the cosmos because they're like little bee hotels, and I wake up in the morning and they're napping in there. But I think my point there was mostly just that I started getting a real sense of the weather when I started gardening, and maybe less the weather, but more seasons. Like you just can't plant certain things in certain seasons. And that's a fun little dance of I've never been one to like do a ton of research before I jump into something, unfortunately, but also naivety has gotten me so far in my lifetime. And and so just jumping into learning, like dabbling, what grows in what
Mm,
seasons, how early can I start planting things,
mm,
and now it is definitely, now that my livelihood is actually based on creating these gardens and growing these botanicals and finding optimal, not only planting times, but optimal companion plants and optimal harvesting times and, optimal watering and like
yeah,
soil pH and every single bit of science, alchemy,
mm,
my own intuition, and, the wisdom of so many people that came before me, and constantly building on that. But it really is all so dependent on the weather this season and the light that you have available to you. And of course, then the soil and the micronutrients and everything that goes into that. But more than anything, it is definitely distilling that forces me to be the most in tune
Yeah.
with that practice. And I think in that little bit of like alchemy then is wrapped in and intuition and yeah, it's really enjoyable. But yeah, talking about the weather, I'm like, yeah, what else is there?
This is life. Hey there. I'm so glad to have Tabitha Rose of Skin Fancy on the podcast today, and she serves as such a sweet reminder of what it means to source within a region. When I think about sourcing for salt, I look no further than Redmond Real Salt, which is mined right here in the USA from the ancient Sundance Sea in Utah. If you've been a listener for a while, you'll know how much I rely on this salt. It's more than just a flavor enhancer, right? It is packed with 60 plus trace minerals and it's nourishing from the inside out. Redmond Real Salt has its own earthy, sweet flavor that it brings to all those vegetables that are about to start appearing in our gardens. I cannot wait. And as we head into the warmer months and long work days outside, you know that I'm rehydrating with their Relight electrolytes. And they also have this kids line that is amazing. It's lower sodium and it has organic veggie powders, and I love it. And because I'm just a big kid. This is all from a company that truly cares. And having met the miners and been on their production line, I can tell you that with the utmost honesty. You can grab your giant bag of salt, Relight electrolyte powders, bentonite clay at redmond.life, and you can get 15% off with the code mindbodysoil_15 or by clicking the link in the show notes. And now, back to our podcast with Tabitha Rose. You said
Yeah.
something when you were first talking about distilling and you were talking about the timing of harvesting the plants, just the time of
Hmm.
day and the weather, which reminded me of hay. Hay is
Hmm.
not dissimilar
Right.
in an interesting way, but you said something that you can feel when the distillation is off. And I was
Hmm.
really struck as you were going through that. I'm a researcher. I'm an
Uh-huh.
herb researcher. I like some analysis paralysis in my life.
Yeah.
But you said, that naivete and just kind of going into it allows you to feel and to learn by touch and feel. And
Hmm.
so to start with distillation, because this is such a central piece, I wonder if you might tell me what do you mean when you say that you can feel it? And will you give us a little primer on what distillation itself is? I think because it might not feel like something in the sphere for all of us.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, first of all, distillation, is- uh, it's the practice of alchemy. And when I say alchemy, I don't mean specifically magic in the way that we think of it now, but
Yeah.
alchemy at one point was in the early, in ancient tradition, it was the study of, you know, philosophy focused on transforming substances,
Mm.
particularly metals, and exploring the relationship between like those substances, magic, and astrology. And so originally, the whole idea of alchemy was to transmute or change something from its original form into something else. And the whole idea was, the idea of like the sorcerer's stone or creating the elixir of
Yeah.
immortality and magic. And distillation was a huge part of that. And so, what I do as far as distillation, I use a copper alembic still and take, for the most part, botanical matter that I grow myself or wild harvest and use super fresh, vibrant spring water from our well, which we're so lucky to have. And vibrant spring water, like fresh water, is really key in a good distillation.
Yeah.
But the process really mostly involves either a hydro or steam distillation. And so I have a copper alembic still, and there is a column for steam distillation. So the plant material goes into the column, and then the waters are slowly heated. I like to distill very slowly. Just I think it creates the best most optimal distillation for hydrosol, but the waters are slowly heated with a fire, and then the
Mm.
steam travels up through the cellular walls of the plant and strips them open. And there's a condenser that cools the volatile oils and steam that material and eventually creates the distillate. And so, uh, I guess there's there's multiple ways to distill, but it generally involves that process or a hydrodistillation in which you put the plant material into the actual pot of the still, submerge the plant material, and then practice the same type of distillation where you break
Yeah.
down the materials. Usually more,
Fascinating.
yeah, it's really, really special, but more delicate plant materials, generally you want to do a steam distillation in the column, whereas more like resinous or
Mm.
fibrous materials you put into the pot of the column. And essentially, you're capturing the energetics of the plant. You're capturing the volatile oils, compounds, like you're capturing kind of um, the whole essence of the plant within this beautiful, hydrosol distillate. And then at the top, you find oftentimes a little bit of essential oil if you're distilling slowly and specifically for a hydrosol. If you're distilling specifically for the essential oil, there's a bit of a different process, and you want to do it at a higher temperature. It's a little faster and a slower or a smaller amount of time to create the
Mm.
essential oil at the top. Um, so, yeah, in essence, that is what a distillation is.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
then,
Because I
yeah.
think that would have I think that I understood, and I've seen your beautiful still, and I
Mhm.
was looking at pictures of stills before we got on and thinking about alchemy and what it means to sort of transform matter, but you explained it really beautifully, and I appreciate that.
Mhm. And then what was the second part of your question? I forget.
You said that you can feel when it's off, which I assume also means
Oh,
that you can feel when it's on, that you
sure.
can
Yeah.
feel when it's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wondered if you would talk about that, like where that feeling lives, what that is, how you've
Hmm.
cultivated it. And then
Yeah,
I actually want to talk about distillation a little bit more as well.
sure. Yeah.
Hey, friends, if you've been loving the podcast and feel called to support the work I do, I've got a couple of ways for you to get involved. First and foremost, your listenership means the world to me. And if you're loving this episode, make sure that you are subscribed in whatever podcast app that you use. And if you'd like, you can leave a rating and review. And always, please, if this episode resonates, share it with a friend or family member. That is how people find new podcasts. But I also have two new ways to support me, or two old new ways: Patreon and a Substack. And here's the deal. Right now, I'm not promising anything in exchange. So there's no extra content or hidden perks or promise of a weekly newsletter, but those will come in the future. And I know that might be a lot to ask to let this podcast be the creation, but it would make a really big difference in my world right now. So Patreon and Substack, link in the show notes. There's also a place you can leave a one-time tip. And if you value these conversations, the deep dives into resources, history, ecosystems, food, economics, and beyond, I really invite you to check them out. You can find the link in the show notes. And it really is right now just the best way to keep this podcast running and to support the incredible conversations that we have coming up. Now, back to our interview with Tabitha.
So copper itself being a beautiful conductor of energy, right? A beautiful conductor of electricity, of electrical impulses, everything, but specifically energy. And then you have water, which is, of course, also, you can infuse vibration and sound into water. And
Yeah.
so when you're distilling, I find, and I know so many who have been distilling before me find that the energy surrounding the distillation, so going into from every single aspect of the distillation, the prep work that goes into cleaning the still beforehand, into creating a space that feels home and tranquil, or receptive to the distillation, to the plants, harvesting the plants in a way that is, you want to ask for permission. You want to at least try to have some sort of relationship and deep understanding of the plant. You want to harvest it at its peak time. You don't want to over harvest because you don't want to go in and, you know, I guess the word would be like unsustainably harvest a plant in a way that it's not going to come back. Again, taking too much, but all of those energetics that go into it, which is can be boiled down to just or science too, but there's so much more than just the science behind all of it. Going into that, filling the pot. I find that if I'm, feeling rushed or stressed or overwhelmed going into the distillation, or if something goes wrong, it's heated too hot, things start boiling over. Obviously, that can ruin the distillation, but even small things like, yeah, I guess just feeling like going into a distillation rushed or you've harvested not at an ideal time. When you're done with the distillation, it might smell pretty good, but the energetics, when you spray it, this water has traveled through copper and it is like holding the imprint of this plant inside of it.
Mm.
And so if there are vibrations that are negative or stressed running into it, it feels like they're held within the waters, the final waters. And so it's not like we must have all good vibes going into a distillation. But it does come through with the energetics of the final product. Through my years of experience distilling, and first going into it, like I said, I sometimes often will go into something a little bit naively and just like, I'm just going to try this thing out. If I like it or if I want to do it more, then I'm nose deep in research. All of a sudden, like, okay, I really want to explore this, but I want to explore it with some actual foundation behind me. And so my first few distillations were just because I was really inspired and I thought that it looked so fun and I wanted to create my own skin tonics. And I just wanted to test the waters. And then I was hooked after. No, I guess I wasn't hooked after my first one. My first one, I had all these ideas about what I was going to distill, but no research to back it up. I didn't even know if I wanted to distill persimmon leaves. And I talked to another distiller friend of mine about how strongly I felt about distilling persimmon leaves because I'd been using them a lot in teas and I'd been really encouraged to use them for skincare. When I lived in South Korea, a lot of women there were really pretty adamant about like what I should be doing for my skin, and it oftentimes came back to eat persimmon, use persimmon on your skin, drink persimmon leaf tea. And so I thought, well, I should be distilling this and it's going to be the most beautiful hydrosol and I'm going to mix it with some honeysuckle. And I did my first distillation. And first of all, I had a still that isn't specifically an alembic style. It's copper, but it had a huge column. Persimmon leaves. Now, if I were to distill them, I would want to do a hydro distillation in the pot, but I didn't know anything about this. So anyway, the distillation came out so green. It smelled absolutely terrible. And I was just like, wow, I suck at this. Like, ew, I don't know what I'm talking about. But I was really called to these persimmon leaves, like using them in a skincare product. And so I realized I needed to not be so fixed and that maybe I should actually do some research and like, people have been distilling for literally thousands of years. And so maybe there's a reason that they either haven't been recorded as being distilled or, that maybe I should be working with plants that are a lot more common and that there's like actual research and understanding behind. And so that was sort of a fun little like intro to I guess I don't know very much about this particular thing and I want to know more. And I think my second distillation ended up being something super common like lavender. And it's like, okay, like I can do this. This makes a lot more sense to me. It was a lot easier just sort of understand like what compounds I'm getting out of this distillation. It smelled good, it felt really nice, and it was easy. And so yeah. So, but the energetics if there's something that I've never distilled before, it's never going to be a hydrosol that, even if it works out really well, it's never going to be something that I release the first time around. It's something that I might play with and use in my own, practice. I might drink little bits of it. I might use it for myself and my kids, but there's definitely always an element of unknown or we'll see. And I feel like that also can come through in the hydrosol. But when I've distilled something many, many times and I have a relationship with the plant and I
Yeah, I
have
was
an
about to say.
understanding, yeah, then I'm like, oh, this is a nice flow. And I know exactly how this should smell and how I want it to smell and how I want it to feel and how I want it to interact with my skin. And then it becomes something that I also want to share more widely with people that are interested in my products.
Yeah, you're building a
So,
relationship with both plants and process.
yeah,
And now, let's talk about keeping our feet grounded, literally. In today's episode with Tabitha Rose, we're keeping ourselves connected to earth, and Behay Shoes lets you do just that. I've been wearing Behay shoes for over a year now. They're Revive shoes for walks and runs and light hikes, and they're Rediscover shoes for big hikes and farm work. And there's a reason. Not only are they a minimal, low-profile sneaker that lets your foot move how it was designed, with a zero drop and a wide toe box, they also have grounding technology so you can reap the full benefits of an electrical connection to the earth. With Behay shoes, that connection is both biomechanical and energetic. The sole's flexibility has also helped me gain full connection when walking, and I've been lifting in them as well. And if I needed to wear shoes to a gym, I work out at home, these would be the ones. For walking, lifting, and everything in between. You can check them out at behay.co and use the code KATE10. Again, that's behay.co, BAHE.co, and KATE10 to get 10% off. Now, back to our interview with Tabitha. I'm really captured by the way that you explain it. And
mm,
I have more questions, but I also have questions about you that came up in
I'm
that
sure.
process. And so I'm not sure what to chase first. I oh, unless something calls to you, because I either want to
Mhm.
chase South Korea or I want to
Okay,
chase
yeah.
copper a little bit.
Oh, well, we
Um,
can do both.
um,
Whichever one seems.
why don't we talk
We
about
know we want to talk about copper, so maybe while it's fresh, we can talk about South Korea.
yeah, that's what I was about to say. And I want to
Sure.
bring you into this. We've gotten like this beautiful sort of entry point
Hmm.
into who you are, I think through distillation. And I've hadn't heard about South Korea or how
Oh.
you came into what drew you to distillation in the first place, or if there's something that comes before that around skin.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I wonder if there's an entryway somewhere
Oh,
in
there's
there.
there's always an entry. And it does start with South Korea in such a sweet roundabout way, and then also ties into motherhood. So after I graduated, I got my bachelor's in Bellingham at Western Washington University, and then moved down to Portland for a bit and was having trouble deciding what to do with my life in general, and I was like, well, I have
Yeah.
this degree. I really want to use it. I also really want to travel. I also want to get paid to travel. And so eventually, I heard about a friend of a friend was living in South Korea and teaching English, and you needed a bachelor's degree to do that. And I thought, well, I've really not done a whole lot of traveling in my life. And so this is a great time. And I think I was
Mm.
20, 22, 23, 23. And so on a pretty interesting, just a whim, it's like, I'm going to do this. The wanderlust is kicked in and I
Mm.
can and I will. And so I packed a suitcase and got hired with a company, no, a public school, and moved to South Korea. And had a really wonderful time there. learned so much in such a short time, mostly out of necessity. Like I didn't speak much, if any, Hangul, which is the language in South Korea, and through mostly like really uncomfortable taxi cab rides where I needed to be able to communicate and I was being yelled at because I'm obviously this foreigner who speaks, I'm not speaking the language. I was like, oh, this is what you're asking me. This is information I need to know. I need to know my address. I need to know how to get, to and from place. And I ended up having some really beautiful co-teachers, like just wonderful humans who were very patient with me, and we learned a lot and together. And I'd get invited to their homes, and there was a lot of talk of skincare amongst my women co-teachers. It was a really, Korean skincare is huge, but also just um, like just common conversations like this. Food is really good for your skin. This, like everything kind of related to, well, you should drink this because it's good for your skin. And I think really it was more so, this is just a good thing for you, but it's, it will come out as this is good for your skin. Um, and at the time, I loved baking in the sun. I mean, grew up in the 80s and in the 90s, and I just thought the more sun, the better. And that
The
was
time
definitely
of the
not,
tan.
oh yeah. And I was like, give me the baby oil. Like, what can I do to get tanner? And my mom, being an esthetician, was
Mm.
always talking to me about using sunscreen. And I was like, yeah, but it's not as cute. I don't wanna. And gosh, of course, now I'm like, wow, I should have listened to her. Worn a hat, like at least something. But at the time, it didn't matter to me. And I was like, well, I'll deal with that when I'm 40. Well, now I'm 40 and I'm dealing with it. And it's also okay. Like I've also made peace now. I'm like, it's not that big of a deal, but the health aspect is really important. Um, but
There's
anyway, yeah,
just really quick, I just want to interject, and your mother was an esthetician.
yeah,
So there's a
yes,
lineage piece here too.
yes, absolutely. Yep. She was an esthetician for, I think since I was, let's see, I would say 25 years at least, maybe 30. And she was, I think, like an OG holistic esthetician for the
Mhm.
times, in the early 90s. There weren't really many people, especially where I grew up, that were utilizing like herbs. And,
Yeah.
like she would occasionally make her own skincare products. She had a line that she used also, but she really incorporated a lot of like massage and holistic therapies. And, she definitely was an early understanding, like she had an early understanding of the skin gut health connection.
Wow.
And so, yeah, she was definitely ahead of her time in that way. And it was so much fun to have like, a wax pot she had a spa in our house in the downstairs. And so I could go down there and like use fancy skin creams and
Mm.
wax my own eyebrows far too thin.
It was the
And
90s.
Oh
You're
man,
tan. We
yep,
we and you
yep.
gotta, yeah, me too. Me
Yeah,
too.
yep. Like the sticker on my, yeah.
Mhm.
So, and my dad actually was a hairdresser, like all growing up also, and when he and my parents were married, had a salon built outside of our home. And so it was definitely an easy leap for me to just be like, oh, I can open up my own practice. Like, this is what I've grown up with. This is what I've seen. I
Yeah.
know how this business works. I know that it can work. I know what it takes. And I also have these resources, my parents who are like really wonderful cheerleaders and who have so much knowledge.
Yeah.
I mean, my dad he still has a salon, and um, he's been at it for 45 years
Wow.
or more. Yeah. So, Yeah.
When you went to South Korea, were you surprised to find so much talk about skin there? Like, was
It
being an esthetician on your radar, and were
no,
you
it
and so
definitely no.
I feel like you ran right back into skin.
Right. So it wasn't on my radar. And I was mostly surprised to hear about it. I guess the piece of talking about the fact that I was very tan, I had come to South Korea, I think, with a tan. And then while I was on a break, I traveled to Thailand and baked in the sun. And so a lot of my co-teachers were very concerned for me. They were just like, no, 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 you need to be careful.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, you do notice right away, a lot of folks wearing hats and long sleeve shirts and being very aware of their exposure to the sun and, relating that to wanting to make sure that they were protecting their skin. And so I definitely was struck, but I think I was also just struck by everything
Yeah.
in this new
Oh, yeah.
culture. I was completely struck by the food. I was struck by, obviously the language, all of my students wearing uniforms. I hadn't really experienced, it
Mm,
was just a completely different culture, and I was there for it and really excited to
mm.
be somewhere new and just so wildly different from where I'd grown up.
Yeah.
But I definitely got a facial over there at one point, and it was recommended that I bleach my skin. I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. Thank you. But it was fun. I'd never had a facial from anyone but my mom. And so that was
Mm.
it was fun and interesting. But while I was there, I not only learned a lot about skincare, but I fell in love with so many foods that now I know to be so nourishing for my skin, and persimmons keep coming up for me, but it was like I'd never even really tasted a persimmon. And I lived in an apartment above this little market, and it was a fish and produce market. And they were right next to each other, two different markets. And so I'd go down in the mornings and buy a persimmon and just, eat it. And it felt so I felt so fancy for doing that. I was like, look at this new fruit that I love, and this is my new favorite fruit. And I fell in love with fermented foods, and it took a
Yeah.
minute. It took a minute to get into like the food culture, but after I'd say about a month, I was hooked, and I was, eating the school lunches with my co-teachers, and it would be like whole fish with
Mm.
like delicious dishes with red bean paste and then kimchi with every single meal and
Yeah.
these pickled vegetables. And I was just like, this
Beautiful
is a
ferments.
dream,
Yeah.
beautiful
I mean,
ferments. And
just
this was our
stunning ferments.
school lunch. This was what the kids were also being
Wow.
fed. This was like just really beautiful foods. And unbeknownst to me, for a short period of time while I was there, and I was really starting to crave these foods and really starting to crave persimmon, I found that I was pregnant with my daughter in South Korea
Mhm.
alone, like
Yeah. I mean,
living.
that is, I don't even,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
That is a wild,
It
I
was a
cannot imagine.
wild, it was wild, like being in a completely foreign country. I grew up in a family, a massive family. I have over 50 cousins. They all live within, the same
Oh,
area. Like, and this is on both sides of my family. There were 11 on my mom's side and 9 siblings on my dad's, and they all had
that's a
children.
lot.
It's a
Yeah.
lot.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. And so I came from this massive held community. We'd
And
have Sunday.
do you have siblings? Can I?
I do. Yep. I have 3 siblings.
Okay.
Yeah. And so traveling, and I'm the oldest too. And so I was always sort of the caretaker for my
Yeah.
siblings, and whether it was just self-imposed or necessary at times. And so it was a huge leap for me to be alone in a foreign country, but also really, really necessary. I think there was so much growth
Yeah.
and so much like, wow, can I really do this without my community of support? And it was really empowering to know that I could. And then just as soon as I started feeling really confident in that, about halfway through, I found out I was pregnant. And I was just like, wait. I don't think I can do this.
Yeah.
Um, and so my daughter's dad was also from the Portland area. That's sort of how we connected. And so there were so many unknowns at that time, like so many, I was 24 years old. I was just not intending to come home anytime soon. That wasn't really in the plan. I wasn't intending to be a mother that early in life. And everything shifted. And it was
Yeah.
just this moment of, wow, okay, where do we go from here? And so I ended up finishing out my contract and flying home. I think I was like 29 weeks pregnant.
Oh,
It,
wow.
yeah, like at the
You
very tail
pregnant?
end. I was very pregnant. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Like
she was
she was
close.
coming. Yeah. So I moved into a house that I found in Portland. Her dad and I were going to co-raise her in Portland, and he was still living in South Korea, finishing out his own contract, but he was going to be home by the time she was born. So I moved into a house all by myself. I remember like carrying a TV and balancing it on my stomach, and my new neighbors across the street were just like, "Hey, don't do that. We care about you. We're going to come help you move in." And so I moved into a house within a month of coming home, and a handful of days after getting everything set up, I went into labor early at 35 weeks.
What I mean,
Um,
I'm a little agog at how much your world gets turned on its very
oh,
axis. I mean, just
oh, complete.
a
Yes.
complete shift. I love this. I this is the these are this
This is
is a
the
story.
juicy
This
stuff.
is a juicy story. Yeah,
Yeah.
I cannot fathom I don't know, the intersection of being that age and having some
Mm,
wanderlust and getting immersed with and falling in love with this other culture and
mhm.
then being called home
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
to a total transformation of self into mother.
Oh, complete. Absolutely. So many transformations, and also really challenging my fixed nature and my plans.
Yeah,
Once again, it was like, actually, there's something else in store here. Um, and we're doing this. But from the moment I found out I was pregnant, I will say I was in. Like I was not, I was not worried about my ability to mother. It was an immediate, like,
mm,
deep love for her from the moment that I knew that this was happening. It was more the semantics of like, where am I going to do this? Am I going to stay in South Korea?
yeah,
And her dad and I we weren't super familiar with each other. It
yeah,
was, and being raised also like in religious families, it was like,
mm,
well, are you going to marry this human? What,
yeah,
a lot of my family was like, is he Korean? And for whatever reason, that question just really bothered me. It was like,
yeah,
either way, is that
yeah,
necessary information? Um, but yeah, I ended up going into labor early, and well, I will say I was induced by the hospital early. Um, and that's a long story for another time, but I ended up having her pretty early, and she was born right around 35 weeks, and so she needed to be in the NICU for just a very short time.
yeah,
And I was really proud. I'm really proud now looking back at my ability to advocate, not for myself in the early stages of that, because I didn't know how. I think had I
yeah,
known to advocate for myself, I would have refused the induction. I would have trusted myself more. But
yeah,
the moment she was born, that sense of self doesn't dissolve, but it expands. And you're like, now I am these people, and I am
mm,
completely responsible for like her entire well-being. And this thing just happens to you, this like mama bear lioness is born, and you're just completely enamored by this tiny human that you have to protect and nourish and love. And so, our experience in the hospital, while it was not in my plan, once again, it was not my fixed. I was like, I was going to give birth at home in a tub and, or a birth center, and all of these really just, kind of more natural ideas I had about everything were thrown out the window. And she was born in the hospital, and she was in the NICU for a week. But I was really determined to nurse her. I was determined to make sure that I stayed with her. I mean, there were certain visiting hours in the NICU that I was not supposed to be in there, and I was a monster and just refused.
I
And
love
I
that.
couldn't leave her side.
Yeah.
And she was just on my chest the entire time. And she was thriving. We figured it out so quickly. And we were really lucky. I mean, she was born early, but her lungs were formed. She didn't have a suckling reflex yet. And so we had to use a shield for a long time. But I used the shield for months until we figured it out. It's called the nipple shield, and it
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
essentially helps a baby to nurse. And
Yeah.
yeah, and
I think they're
so
more popular now. I'm surprised to hear this. I mean,
yeah,
this was some time ago, and some of the
mhm.
things you're mentioning are,
Yeah,
I don't
yes,
think they
this
were
was
as much in the cultural lexicon around
right.
birth, and you were
Yeah.
just navigating it by feel.
Yeah, and so much intuition and instinct. And um yeah, I've had so many like things in my life that I've been, not so confident about or have had insecurities, but mothering for me was and always has been so natural. And I know that it's not that for everyone. And I felt really lucky that it clicked, it snapped the moment she was born. It was like, I know what I want to do for her, and I will not back down. I have really strong feelings about this.
Hmm.
So so we got to go home after a week, and essentially I guess I say that the skincare journey all started in Korea, because really it started with her. And the moment that she was born, wanting to make sure that like every single thing that I put into her body under her skin was as beneficial and pure as possible. We practiced elimination communication, which
Yeah. Wow.
I
Okay.
I
You were way ahead of
well,
the okay.
I had a good friend at the time who had done that with her own daughter, and so I had a guide. And actually, in South Korea, they practice it all the time too. You'd see women, unstrapping their babies from their backs and just taking them potty, you know,
Yeah.
at a tree. And it was like this very normalized thing. And so I was like, well, I think this makes sense to me. I can do
Yeah.
this. And so,
I mean, I
yeah,
think that's the default, right? I
right.
think that that was the default historically, right? There wasn't the
Absolutely.
access to the
Yep.
sort of disposables that we have
Right.
now that make not doing that easier.
Yes, absolutely. And, I also practiced it with my son, who it was so much easier with, even because we started from birth. And my husband he'd never done this before, but he was such a good teammate, and he was so on board. He was like, "Oh, of course. Yes, let's do this." And we'd
Yeah.
wake up in the middle of the night, and he'd take him pee in a little bowl next to the bed, and then put him right back down on a little sheepskin, and he'd nurse back to sleep. And it was like, this is so much easier than the alternative to me,
Yeah.
and like going through the whole process and having but it's not common knowledge. And so I don't think that, like, I'm not of the mindset like, oh, everyone should be doing this. We should all be practicing this, because there's no shoulds. And especially within parenting, there's so many different variables and different styles. But
So many.
this worked for me, personally. And I was broke. Like, I couldn't afford lots of diapers. Like, I was a
Yeah.
24-year-old new parent who this wasn't in the plan. And so I was like, well, how do we, if I breastfeed her, we practice elimination communication. Maybe I can also grow some of my own food and
Mm.
make some of my own products so that, I can heal. She had little patches of eczema on her skin, little dry patches. And so that was sort of the beginning of like wanting to create
Mm.
something or, find something that I felt good about putting on her skin. Um, and throughout just that first year or two of like really sinking into mothering, I did a lot of nannying for other people's babies and children, because I was really not willing to leave her side. I think we'd
Yeah.
been through so much together, like being pregnant in a foreign country and flying home and then having her so quickly. And then, just all of it being not traumatic, but just a lot. It was just a
Yeah.
lot, a huge shift so quickly.
Massive.
Yeah. And so it really, and then of course, like being in the NICU, and that whole process, just, I got to a point where I was not willing to leave her side. And so I started nannying other people's children, and it was a really beautiful way to like stay with her and also be able to support us and myself. And in that process, that there's a big piece of, you don't lose yourself necessarily, but your world becomes very funneled down
Mm.
into mono focusing on what is best for this human being. What,
Mm.
like, every decision sort of ends up, especially in the early months and years, like boils down to what can I do to nourish this human
Yeah.
being, properly. Um, and then that extended to like the other children that I was working with also. And so, but you do lose, I didn't have any time to be creative. I couldn't like play a piano. I couldn't,
Yeah.
I love music. I love making music. That's always sort of been my like form of art that I've
I
created.
didn't know that.
Yeah, but I'm also a little bit shy about it. And so, but I can sing. I can play some guitar and I play piano, and so that was always my like, well, someday I'm gonna be a musician, I'll be a
Yeah.
folk musician, and just as a part-time thing. And um so losing, I guess, my like girlhood and being tossed into motherhood, and then losing any free time that I possibly
Yeah.
had, which is so normal. And that's what, happens to most all of us. But then also not having a whole lot of support around me
Yeah.
physically. Um, I was really yearning to find something that I could do creatively that would fulfill that need and desire in me to create some art and create some beauty and create some magic. And so for me, that's where gardening really started. It was like, okay, I can take these babies, I can take my own, I can lay her out on a blanket, and I can dig in the dirt, and I can dig in the soil, and I can plant some things, and then we can all feed them. And it's something to do outside that,
Yeah.
gives us all fresh air. And it just felt really good. My parents both gardened a lot growing up. My mom was an avid gardener. My dad loves to plant like veggies and fruit and trees and everything. But I never cared about it. Growing
Yeah.
up was just, I don't want to go weed. Like, ugh.
Yeah.
Cool guys. I don't like, don't make me work. But I think having that, watching them be so passionate about it was definitely an easy transition to like, oh, I do know how to do this sort of, and let's test out the waters. And so through that whole process, I fell in love with gardening and fell in love with creating, and not just gardening for utilitarian purposes, mostly, I'd say
Mm.
90%, but there was the, 10% of just, I loved creating beauty around me.
Yeah.
And I've always loved that within like homes, creating my own home spaces,
Making
whatever,
magic.
making magic. Yeah. And so that's really where it all started. And it has just grown and grown since then. But really it started with motherhood, and it's grown into what it is now because it's something that I've been so fierce and passionate about the way that I do mother my babies. And it's something that I've been able to do side by side and intermixed,
Yeah.
and they love it, you know?
Can I tug at something before we
Yes.
before
Yeah.
we dive
Where I
in?
talk forever.
No, no, so beautiful. I could listen to you talk forever.
Um,
And I'm fascinated, and I've told you this, but I find your mothering very inspirational.
oh, thank you.
And also accessible in a way as somebody
Yeah.
who's fence sitting. And we can
Yeah.
talk about that later, maybe or not. But I find it very okay. That feels like something I can do.
Yeah.
Um,
Intuition.
One of the things you said that really struck me was that when you talked about becoming a mother, you talked about this massive expansion of self. And then you
Mhm.
simultaneously talked about how your focus funneled down. And I
Mhm.
was really struck by those happening simultaneously. Like what a beautiful thing. You're becoming bigger,
Mhm.
but your scope, your focus is shrinking, especially in those early years.
Yeah.
And I think I just wanted to give it back to you and see if there was anything that came to mind because it was such a, I don't know, almost volumetric way of explaining
Yeah.
this matrescence process.
Yes. Well, I think in that it's the expansion for me, I noticed wasn't a shift that I was expecting, you know,
Yeah.
and I think those are the best kinds of expansion and growth when you're not saying, I'm going to read this book and expand my mind. I'm going to take this class and you know, you're just
Yeah.
I am thrown into the throes of the most physically expanding experience I've ever been in. You know, you completely morph into your body morphs into a whole new physical being. You start producing, you know, life-giving substances.
Yeah.
And so it's not an expansion like that was planned. And I
Yeah.
think that was so much more, it was so much more, I guess, just beautiful for me to have no necessarily agency over how I was expanding. You know, it was going to happen whether or not. And so, of course, there's the emotional shift and expansion where you're just cut open raw and there's no like working your way through what you should or shouldn't feel. There's
Mm,
just what is in the moment. And I think that the loss, I'm not going to say the loss of ego, but boy, in my early 20s and late teens, like I could spend an hour getting ready, right? Maybe
mhm.
an hour and a half. I'm not going to lie, maybe 2 hours. Like maybe there's maybe there's like weird bits of glitter involved by the end of it. Like,
Glitter.
you know, and and then suddenly you're faced with this whole life-changing, life-shattering, expanding moment where you have another human to care for. And the last thing that's on your mind is like, does my hair look okay? You
Mhm.
know? And I really, really loved that. Like I genuinely was so thrilled to welcome that shift. And so I think that it, that in and of itself isn't necessarily an expansion, but more a morphing and a shifting and a maturing because of course you want to get to the point where you do care about your hair again, you know, and you have the time and
Mhm.
the space to do that while also caring that this human has been not only fed, but that their heartbeat is aligned with yours on your physical body and that they're getting
Yeah.
the exchange of skin to skin and that you know you're nourishing yourself so that you can nourish them and those are the expansions that feel so poignant and so unplanned, you know, and that's also I guess something that I love about later motherhood now, which I'm in a phase. My son just told me, you know, he's 9 and he said, I'm halfway to being a grown-up mom. And I was like, oh my God.
Oh.
Don't say that, but also that's really cool. Like on the one hand, I've spent so much of my life nurturing and caring for not only my own children, but other people's. And on the other hand, this is a really cool shift to where I can see not the end of it, but there's, the end of small children, mothering small children.
The
And
end of a
it's
season of it.
the end of a season, absolutely. And I really am also, I'm not ready for it yet, but I'm welcoming the idea that someday I'm not going to be needed anywhere near as much as I am. And currently I'm not needed anywhere near as much as I am physically, but emotionally, you've still got to be there
Yeah.
present for every single moment. And you have to constantly shift and expand with them. The way
Yeah.
that I raise my 9-year-old is different than the way I parent my 16-year-old is different than the way I did when they were tiny.
Yeah.
Um,
They're
yeah,
changing,
there's,
you're changing, your
yes,
contexts are changing, everything is
yes.
shifting.
And there is constant expansion. And if there's not, and you're fixed, there's so much pushback.
Mhm.
It doesn't flow. There's no beautiful flow. Like I find that I can be alone with my children. How do I say that in a way? I can feel alone while I'm with them. Like I don't feel like I have to be on or always caring or nurturing. Like we have such a beautiful relationship to where we can hang out in a room, and if I need to decompress, like they're right there with me. But it is not a pull. It is just a parallel
Yeah.
energy, and
A
it's really sweet.
co-beingness.
Just a co-being, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, then the funnel vision, I feel like, or tunnel vision, the funneling down the outside world, the things that you think about and care about, I think before you have this newborn being cease to exist for a short period of time. Like literally, I think that most new parents could agree that especially in those first few days to weeks to months to maybe a year, um, you still care about the people around you, but the majority of your care is focused on this one teeny tiny little nugget of a being instead of this whole expanded world. And so things do focus, like while you're growing physically outside of that focus, that is your main focus, and
Yeah.
then you slowly crawl out of it. And by the time that I think they no longer physically need your body, which for me was always around like 3 years old, I felt like a sort of new rebirth and agency over myself, and a new phase. And there's just always new phases. Like
Mhm.
no phase lasts for a long time, which is part of the beauty in it, especially when it's a hard phase. But it also makes you appreciate, and want to savor. Like I want to
Mm.
smell my babies, smell their head, like smell the place where their hair meets their forehead, and just breathe in those pheromones at every single phase. I mean, I still like sniff my daughter all the time. She smells of like delicious perfumes that she's
Mhm.
researched and bathing herself in. But yeah.
Mm.
And smell, I will just add, has always
Yeah.
been the absolute most important way that I have experienced the world. Like of all of the senses,
Mm.
that
Since
is the
childhood?
one. Oh,
Yeah.
beyond, I think. Yeah, since childhood. So when I was little, I was a thumb sucker, but
Mm.
the ideal thumb sucking was not complete unless I was smelling a person that I loved. So I could be sucking my thumb and it would calm my nervous system. But if I could snuggle up to my mom and like sniff her hairline,
Yeah.
or my dad, and like have all of those senses encapsulated into one
Yeah.
experience, it was the most tranquil, delicious, aromatic, beautiful, everything. Like my nervous system is never as calm as when I'm smelling someone that I love. Um,
I second that.
and yes,
I'm a sniffer.
yeah, I just, eh, I can't get away from it. I actually had a name for it. I would call it boffing. And I made it up when I was little, and I would, can I boff you? I'd ask my mom, can I boff you?
And you'd
And
smell her.
and I go over and I just make her sit for a moment. You know, it doesn't work if the person is like up and moving around.
Mm-mm.
They have to also be calm and in that moment with you. And you're exchanging oxytocin, you're
Yeah.
exchanging like all of your
Information.
absolutely. Yes. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, smelling, I think, you can smell fear, you can smell some form of love. Like I've never really uh, dated someone that I didn't love the smell of them, or if I have, it didn't end up well, turning out well. And I think that having such a deep sense of smell and knowing instinctually what I like to smell and not has also, it does help me in distilling. It helps me to become a good distiller. Like I can pick out every single note and I know when to end the distillation based on taste and smell and many other things. But I feel like your sense of smell and intuition in distilling is really key. And so it just brings in, a few of those pieces for me, things that I love to do all in one. So it's a
No.
roundabout tie in there.
I was just holding it for a minute because it was so beautiful, the concept of bopping and the idea of you smelling these people
Yeah.
and how much we can smell. I don't think I had thought about it that way. I'll make my husband stand so I can smell him.
Hmm.
Or when he comes home, this is so picky. I'll make him change because I can smell the plane and I can smell the people on the plane and I can
Yes.
smell where he's been, but I can't smell
Yes.
him, right? There's
Uh-huh.
like all this
Absolutely.
smell noise,
Yes.
and I need it stripped down and I need him in a
Mhm.
shirt that's been living in our house, the way our
Yes.
house smells, the way our
Yes.
laundry,
Uh-huh.
in my opinion, doesn't smell, right? Smells
Right. Or it's
neutral.
your smell.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
our smell, and
Hmm.
it's such a the smell is love, and it's texture, and it's information, and
Hmm.
I remember giving a friend a vinegar once. It was a pear vinegar that we had made, and she said, "It tastes like you smell."
Oh, I
Right?
love that.
That some bit of and right in that fermentation process and that
Yes.
transformation process, there's a little bit of us in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just
Yeah.
really loved that and just yeah, it's just perfect, and
Mm,
everything from Skin Fancy that I've experienced has such a textural and subtle and layered smell, right? Like it
mhm.
I sometimes think about what it's like to be a dog, or something that has a more acute, more nerve-packed nose,
Yeah.
and I think about it a lot for when my husband comes home from the airport, and I'm like, "Oh, I can't necessarily
Mhm.
tease them apart, but there are all these layers," and
Right.
Skin Fancy is sort of on the other spectrum of that, where there are all these layers, but they're unctuous, and
Mm.
they're warm, and they're good, and
Mhm.
they're places that I want to crawl inside of.
Yes,
If that makes sense?
it does. I mean, I feel like sometimes there will be a note like in the cold pressed carrot seed oil, there's that earthy, I just want to crawl into a garden that's been freshly mulched and dug up.
Mm, yeah,
And I think that's really important to come through
yeah,
in the products, just because it's so important to me that something that I'm putting on my skin either doesn't have a smell
yes,
or that it smells good but not overpowering and not synthetic just because I have a visceral reaction to
me too.
more synthetic smells. But getting something to smell good, I will say, in the natural skincare world without using essential oils was definitely a challenge
Mm,
because that's the easy way. You're like,
mhm,
oh, well, I have this facial oil and it has, maybe three base carrier oils, and but I really want it to smell really good. So I'm gonna add, lang lang and maybe orange and some lavender, which
yeah,
are all delicious, absolutely.
totally.
But making the choice to formulate without the addition of essential oils meant how do I get these products to smell They don't need to smell strong, but I do want them to smell beautiful. And I want to put them on my skin. And I feel like the smell helps you to connect with
Mhm.
the
Yeah. It's
experience.
part of a ritual. Yeah.
Yeah.
It calls you into it like, "Okay, I'm
Hmm.
here."
Yeah.
They smell
Eh,
like place to me, like if I were really small and I were crawling on the earth in a carrot garden, and I could
mhm,
smell the soil and the tannins and the leaves and the tops of the carrots,
mhm,
as well as sort of this sweet waft of carrot coming up, right? But not with essential oils, it feels like, "Ah, yes, I'm smelling." I don't know, they don't have the dimension, that texture,
mhm,
that sense
mhm,
of being a little thing in a garden, smelling all of these smells that are very earthy and very of place.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. And that really, I think it was that desire to have things smell good, desire to not use essential oils, namely just because when I wasn't creating products for a skincare line, but just for myself, I dabbled in using essential oils and I noticed that they really tended to irritate my own skin. I'm so wildly sensitive. And and so then looking into what carrier oils themselves smell, like have a smell that I enjoy.
Mhm,
And and I think the first carrier oil that came up that I did a search on, just for like different smells was like at the time it was raspberry seed oil.
mm,
And so then looking into, okay, well, what properties does raspberry seed oil have and why would I want to use this? And ordering a little sample and then noticing or wanting to order a sample and then Googling, just a quick search like raspberry seed oil, shopping,
mhm,
and then noticing country of origin pop
mm,
up. And that was my first real intro to, oh, of course, these oils are shipped from all over the world. Like, of course, the raspberries grow in so many different countries and regions. And so, of course, I could choose raspberry seed oil from any country, that it's being produced in Poland, wherever, I can find it. But there was raspberry seed oil that was being produced in Washington from Washington grown raspberries. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool.
yeah.
Like, hello.
That's right
And
here.
okay. And I had studied, I had studied like I got my, holistic nutrition coaching online certification from IIN at one
Mhm,
point and studied like full body systems with Andrea Nakayama and had learned about eating bioregionally
yeah,
and learned about like a bioregional diet and why we would want to source things local to us wherever we are living and then having been growing my own food and vegetables and herbs and some flowers for a good while at that point. I was like, wait, can I get all of my oils? Can I get all of them? Like, why couldn't I just, we live in the Pacific Northwest. Why can't I just get all of these ingredients locally? And so I was like, well, rose hip seed oil is the big, it's the big ingredient right now. Like at the
yeah,
time, this was maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago. And it was super popular for good reason. And so I was like, well, if I can find raspberry seed oil locally, I bet I could find there's rose hips everywhere here. And so I started searching and searching and searching and searching, and I couldn't find it anywhere. And I could get it from Morocco or Spain. And so then it was going to have to be shipped over, you
yeah,
know. And I knew enough at the time to know that that's not actually eh, you know, something that if I were to consider making products for more than just myself or even just myself, like, do I really want to get 4 ounces of rosehip seed oil shipped over to me?
yeah,
Is that sustainable? And so those questions started popping up um and then of course the question of, well, Why is rosehip seed oil so popular? It has a lot of vitamin C. It's rapidly absorbed. It's a drier oil, so it's great for oily skin types. It can absorb quickly. Um, okay, what other oils have a lot of vitamin C naturally,
Yeah.
like fat soluble and are drier oils? Well, raspberry seed oil, in fact, was very similar in its chemical makeup and its fatty acid profiles, like
Mhm.
very similar and in my opinion also more vibrant and beautiful because I could find it locally and
Yeah.
because it smelled insane. Like it literally, if you get a good cold pressed carrier seed oil, and of course, we're not talking about like the scary seed oils that everyone's trying to stay away from within the, like food industry. Um,
Do you want to touch on that now? Do
oh,
you want
I
to?
mean, we can, yeah.
Because I want to come back to this bioregional, but since this is here,
Sure,
this was on my thought, and I know that
sure.
seed oils have become a part of the lexicon, I think, in a way that mm, I have a lot of thoughts that we could unpack, but I think
Mhm.
principally, tell me about seed oils and skin. Tell me about the
Yeah,
oils that we put on our skin
sure.
and what they're made of, because I have never done seed oil free skincare.
Yeah,
Which has been an instinctive thing and a little bit less of a measured choice.
sure. So when we're talking about the skin, of course, our skin itself is made up of multiple fatty acids,
Mhm.
esters, building blocks, ceramides, but with a in skin that maybe is more prone to like being dehydrated or has like a lot of transepidermal water loss, our bodies don't naturally produce linoleic acid, right?
Yeah.
And so you can seed oils
Mhm.
currently the big like seed oil free movement is to stay away from linoleic acid for reasons of avoiding heart disease and cardiovascular disease, but that doesn't take into account, like that's like a blanket term, like okay, so
Huh.
seed oils period. Well, there's so much nuance within seed oils, and there's so much nuance in the way that they are pressed and the way that they are manufactured and the way that they're bottled and like the processing of a seed oil. So when you have a seed oil like a super highly produced like palm oil or something that most people are working to stay away from now in the health industry, of course that's not something that you're necessarily also going to be wanting to put on your face. But studies have shown that ultimate absorption of any skincare product, especially when you're dealing with fatty acids, happens when you have a balanced ratio of omegas. So when you have like a balanced ratio of omega 3 to omega 6 to omega 9s,
Yeah, and
which,
omega-6 is gonna be that linoleic acid,
yes,
just for listeners.
sure, yes. And omega 3 is your linolenic acid, omega 9 is your oleic acid. When you have a balanced ratio, and it doesn't have to mean like everything is like 30 30 30
Yeah,
or whatever it is, but they're within range of each other. um and I hope this makes sense as I'm saying it, but
it
when you
does.
have a balanced ratio, that creates like absolute and optimal absorption for your skin. So you're going to find those really, and actually is also ultimate and like optimal absorption in your body too. So you don't want to necessarily like be afraid of and steer away from linoleic acid. It's you don't want to be depriving your body of the other acids that are balancing
Mhm,
it out.
mhm.
So, and of course, you're not going to want to like drink seed oils or cook with like highly processed seed oils.
No.
But for your skin, you actually want linoleic acid on your skin because your body doesn't naturally produce linoleic acid,
Mm,
but your skin has a lot of linoleic acid on it. And so when you're noticing issues like dryness, flakiness, scaliness, like, eczema, psoriasis, and adding linoleic acid has been proven to be beneficial to the skin. also oleic acid. I mean, all of the acids themselves, but when you have a
These
balanced
are omega
ratio,
9 or monounsaturated fatty acids, something that I
yes.
think we generally associate with olive oil, but
Mhm.
it's in a lot of other things too.
Yes. And, there have also been studies showing that olive oil on its own can actually disrupt the barrier function, like your skin's natural barrier
Yeah.
function. So you really, really want, in my opinion and in my research, and I don't love researching through any sort of like blogs or opinion pieces, but when you can get to the nitty gritty of like a National Institute for Healthcare like
Yeah.
article that really dives deep and then piecing the information together, you find that seed oils specifically for the skin that have balanced ratios of these three fatty acids are absolutely beneficial and beautiful. And, they contain vitamins that can be absorbed into the skin. They're so soothing. They're filled with antioxidants, like they help with free radical damage. They are, they can help to turn over skin cells, which, our skin cells ideally replace themselves or turning over every 28 days. But as we age, that slows down. Can help, massaging your skin with oils can help to stimulate your collagen. It can help to, like you can practice lymphatic massage and drainage and just really connect with your skin on a deeper level than just patting something in or applying something as a cover,
Yeah.
And so when you look at the composition of almost any berry seed oil, coming back to raspberry seed oil specifically, which has a slightly higher ratio of linoleic acid, which is nice for it. It's a little bit drier of an oil. Strawberry seed oil specifically is also um, similar in composition, but these oils that berry seed oil specifically have been shown to have the most beautiful effects of pretty much any seed oil on your skin and ultimate absorption properties. And so blueberry and cranberry seed oil, which I love formulating with in my products, are kind of like those ideal holy grail oils to where they have
Yeah.
like the ideal ratios of these fatty acids to create just like the most, I don't know, ideal mixture for applying topically to your skin. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. And so funny story. I had someone come up to my booth at the farmer's market last year, and she was looking for a tallow balm because she'd heard that, tallow is great for your skin. And I was like, okay, well, I do have a tallow balm. I don't even necessarily refer to it as like a tallow balm. Tallow just happens to be the fat that I use because
Mhm.
it's the only locally sourced, sustainably sourced fat that is available to me in this bioregion. Bonus, it's also really beautiful for your skin and it does contain lots of vitamins and it's easily absorbed. But I have this, long story short, I have this balm and you can try it. Here's a sample. And so she read the ingredients and she was like, oh, never mind. I'm staying away from seed oil, so I can't use this. And I was like, oh, it was the first time that it really dawned on me that the like highly processed seed oils that folks are avoiding in, their foods, that's the fad of that and what it means
Yes.
and the lack of nuance there is translating into we're also not using seed oils in skincare blanket statement, and as if all seed oils are created equally. And so really, of course, that's just education that we all, if we're interested in the education, need to understand. And so I, got to explain to her, well, this is meadow foam seed oil is, the main oil that you'll find in this tallow balm, that and blueberry seed oil, of course, has these perfect ratios of these fruit and, fatty acids, but also meadow foam seed oil does not even contain any linoleic acid. It's a
Yeah.
completely separate, it's almost like a wax. It's similar to jojoba oil and it's just happens to come from a seed. It's also, it only grows around, like meadow foam only grows in the Pacific Northwest for the most part. And it's wildcrafted and cold pressed here. And it's such a beautiful oil and it's so softening. And we don't actually need to be afraid of it. We just have to understand how it's being made. We have to understand where we're getting these things from. And so, yeah, yes.
Oh, I want to make sure we've covered this in a way that feels good to you. It feels great to me because
Mhm.
I think and I'll say this especially for us here in America. I'm not going to put this on others, but there's this idea that more is better, and if we're avoiding
Mhm.
something, we're avoiding it. It is none. It's
Right.
absolutely 0, and it needs to
Mhm.
it needs to be eliminated from everything, always.
Mhm. Yes.
And there is so much nuance, and I think there's so much beauty right when we eat a blueberry, we're eating a blueberry
Mhm.
seed. There's
Mhm.
really no way to pick around it.
Right.
And so that's going into our body, and that balance is really what we're looking for here. But I
Mhm.
wanted to make sure because I've never used skincare that was seed oil free because skincare that had seed oils always felt so juicy and luscious to me
Mhm.
and to my skin. And so
Yeah.
that just is something that I've kept in. And I think yeah, I just want to make sure we've plumbed that one. Um,
I think so.
okay.
I was just sort of rambling on, so we can just
No, I love
pick
it.
out bits and pieces that felt poignant, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, the piece I want to ask when you were saying that, I was thinking, gosh, is there anything? Berries are so abundant in most
Mhm.
of North America, right?
Yeah.
Like they grow well in a very wide variety of climates. They're very self-propagating.
Mhm.
Raspberries just sort of replant themselves.
And spread and
Blueberries,
spread and
blackberries.
spread.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about sourcing things bioregionally, and I had this question about who is pressing these? Like, where I
Mhm.
imagine there's a bottleneck just in terms of that step that's
Yes.
taking from blueberry seed to this
Yeah.
end product that you're then using to create with.
Mhm. Yes.
I was just curious.
So, yeah, so it really varies. And that is one, uh, the pressing of seed oil specifically is one area that I myself am really interested in the
I bet.
possibilities down the road, just because I'm
Yeah.
like, well, could I, I'm doing a lot of these other steps myself, but this is one area that, it does require an abundance of product, right?
Yeah.
So pressing raspberry seeds, especially when you're getting an oil from like a berry seed, or a berry, it's a byproduct of the fruit industry. And
Sure.
so the nice thing there is that it's just one less piece of, like, unused. If you're already pressing for the juice or for the pulp, or for the you want to like press for the strawberries themselves and then create a powder, but then you have the seeds left over. Well, if it's done in a way that is conducive to then creating a beautiful cold pressed seed oil, how wonderful that we're also, it's like a
Yeah.
recycled product almost.
Yeah.
um, but that being said, there is a bottleneck on, who presses seed oils, and there's very few farms that are able to do that work themselves,
Yeah.
because the equipment, I mean, I looked into it. I was like, oh yeah, I can press my own seed oils, no big deal. Like, I have a few blueberry bushes, and this is early on. A good seed oil press that's going to produce a decent volume is, just off the bat, it's like a minimum of a $9,000 investment just to start.
Yeah. That
You
was
know,
actually I figured it might be even
well,
more.
and that's like a quantity that like something like my company would need.
Yeah.
But that's, my business is small, it's organic in a way that it grows with my garden, it grows with my ability.
Yeah.
I've never like
Mhm.
advertised or tried to grow it beyond my own capacity. So
Mhm.
for my needs, it would be like an initial investment of just the equipment, the bare bones equipment that I would need would be like $9,000 for a good seed oil press that could handle a volume. That would be enough for me if I did multiple
Yeah.
pressings, which is cost prohibitive for my own
Absolutely.
business, you know, and
Absolutely.
also like time prohibitive, like the
I was
amount of sorting, because that's just the press. That's not to sort the berries, you know, and process them and to be able to separate the berries from the seeds. That's just the press itself. And there's a lot more equipment, of course, that you would need to involve in the process.
mm,
And so
time and
there,
space. I presume that
yeah,
it's not a that it is a space-taking
yes,
process.
totally. Yeah. Yep. And you know, sanitizing the I mean, there's so much that goes into it, and I respect folks that do this on a slow and deliberate scale
Yeah.
so much because like wow, I mean, that's a whole it's a whole job in and of itself. And so when you find a farm that is not only growing, say like where, you know, I get my pumpkin seed oil from a farm down in Oregon, and they grow the pumpkins. They separate the seeds, which I guess, you know, separating pumpkin seeds is slightly easier than like
Yeah.
a blueberry seed, which
Way
is
easier than a berry.
minute. And then they cold press the pumpkin seeds. And it is the quality is so beautiful. And it comes out this rainbow spectrum oil that looks like dark red when you have, you know, say like you have a half of a gallon. It's this beautiful, vibrant, rich, almost dark red. And then you tilt the glass and you start getting like hues of purple and greens and yellows. And
Mm,
then when you just put a small, you know, dropper in your hand, there's like this almost rich greenish yellow, and you don't get any notes of red in your hand. And it's just this
mm,
very complex, beautiful oil that contains zinc and copper and so many vitamins. Um, and it's all done on this farm. And then I get to order it directly from them. The raspberry seed oil is
amazing.
pressed up in Washington, you know, and the berries are grown up in Washington. And a good handful of other oils that I found are also done in this way, but it's impossible to source every single oil directly from the farm
Yeah.
unless I only wanted to use a handful. You know, if I mean, I would really, really have to limit the ingredients that I use beyond my already limiting scope
Mhm.
of like sourcing them all from in the USA. And then if not, you know, if not bioregionally, if not locally type of
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. So not that it would be a boring product. It just there's certain things like I really want to use jojoba oil, you know,
Yeah.
which does come directly from a farm, but it's not within our bioregion. It's a little
Yeah.
farther south.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Especially being in a more northern climate too. I mean, that
yeah,
sort of bioregionally, even if you cast a pretty wide net, I
hmm,
mean, 200-300 miles, you're still pretty far north,
right, yes,
for
yep,
that growing cycle. And so I love that you've kind of made containers so
hmm,
as close to home as possible,
hmm,
and then slowly expanding out, but keeping it inside the USA.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
I'd say probably 85%, 85 to 90% of my ingredients are sourced bioregionally,
it's
but there's
incredible.
just a few that I'm just like, I can't give these, you know, these specific oils up. Like they're just too beautiful. And I don't want to also just be reusing the same oils again and again in every product. And they are suited for different skincare conditions too.
Mhm.
And so there's certain, you know, there's certain serums I want to absorb rapidly. There's others that I want to be more nourishing. And so, yeah, I feel like my container, sometimes I feel like my container is too small. I'm like, gosh, do I really have to be so strict? Like, do I really have to just, but that's what
Yeah,
it is.
I empathize with that, and one thing
uh,
I love when we talked, I don't sometime last fall, and we talked about how sometimes that small container makes things bigger. This conversation
mhm,
has been very volumetric, actually, but
yeah.
sometimes that tighter container gives you more space.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's I think it comes back to the like the rosehip seed oil and raspberry seed oil. I never would have necessarily worked with raspberry seed oil in the capacity that I do now had I not understood that it is a very close, it has, it's very similar to rosehip seed oil. Like it, giving myself those limitations forced me to look deeper into ingredients that I may have never even been interested in.
Yeah.
I at one time was wanting to make the perfect cleansing oil. And if you Google a good cleansing oil, your castor oil is going to pop up immediately. It's like one of the main ingredients that folks tend to use in a DIY cleansing oil. Well, castor oil is obviously not sourceable locally in any
Yeah.
way, shape, or form. And then, there's also the problem that arises with like how are the folks who are creating this castor oil paid? And a lot of times
Yes.
it's not good,
That are
the
growing
whole.
castor, it's a bean, isn't it? Is it a
Yes,
bean? That
yeah,
are growing
yes.
castor beans. Like, who are these
Hmm.
farmers? How are they
Right,
being paid? How
right.
how is that labor being treated in
Absolutely.
the collecting of the beans or in the
Yes.
pressing of the oil itself?
Right. And there's a lot of exploitation involved, it turns out, when you look just a little bit deeper. And not that castor oil isn't a beautiful product. I think it absolutely serves and has its purpose. And there are sustainable forms, sources that you can find. However, for me, needing to find an antibacterial and like deeply cleansing but nourishing oil element to replace castor oil led me to hazelnut oil, which is grown in Oregon. I mean, the
Yeah.
hazelnuts are grown in Oregon and they're pressed in Oregon, and it's so beautiful, and it's a lot less drying to the skin, but it has, those like astringent properties. And I was so excited to be able to like work directly with a producer of this oil. And so, yeah, it expanded my options, it expanded my reach. And expanded and it was like, okay, I can do this. I have 5 oils to start with that I know I can source locally. So
Yeah.
where can we go from there? If I can grow, you know, all, if not most of the botanicals, and then like wildcraft them, then that's a pretty good start. And I've definitely branched out. Like my garden has expanded a lot. And so I am now able to grow 90% of the botanicals, but there's that strict part of me that like wants to go extreme sometimes,
Too.
and
Yeah. Uh-huh.
yeah, then be like, I can do it all myself. And then there's
Yeah.
the other wiser, slightly wiser part of me that's, sinking into my womanhood and my community. It's like, no, it's actually really sweet to reach out to community and to source
Mhm.
things from outside of what your capacity is. Like, what a
Mm.
beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I've loved having one of my good friends lives out in the gorge here, and I know her growing practices, and I know she also wants to kiss her plants. I know that she adores and loves and is in like deep community with her garden. And I can just sense that when we're in her garden talking. And so, yes, I'm going to source lavender if I run out, if I use too
Yeah.
much, or if mine isn't growing at the same rate because I'm at a higher elevation, but I really
Mm.
want to, harvest some. She has this 100-year-old Madame Hardy rose bush that is just this matriarch queen of a vintage heirloom rose. And I get to harvest these roses every June and distill them into the most beautiful rose hydrosol that wouldn't exist had I only been willing to do it myself,
Yeah.
and grow it myself. And so, um,
And that
so
plant is in that hydrosol, and she's in that hydrosol, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Your
Yes.
community, it's such a beautiful reframing, I think. I'll give an example here. The other day, Josh and I make a lot of cheese, and we were talking about how we wanted to play with more cow cheeses, but our our cow isn't pregnant right now and won't be in
Mhm,
milk this
mhm,
year.
mhm.
And so we were gonna wait, right? Because I have to do it has to come from right.
Right.
It
Yes.
has to
Yeah.
come from Jilly. It has to come from my cow.
Yeah.
And we have so many people who raise beautiful dairy here that we
Right.
can play with. And
Yeah.
I think that we get stuck in all or nothing, right? I'm gonna
Mhm,
do it all. We get
mhm.
stuck in a sense of rugged individualism, right?
Yes. Yes.
It's all coming from me, and that's incredible.
Right.
And you just reminded me that when we expand, when we allow ourselves to expand, when we allow ourselves to get bigger with
Mhm.
fewer options, that it brings in a whole web of community
Yes.
that makes something even more magical. And I think that
Mhm.
you're bringing the magic of her kissing her plants and that 100-year rose bush that you're not going to find in some rose water situation that you buy anywhere.
Right. Right. No. And she has the story of the rose bush and the original folks, who planted it and where it was moved from. And there's such a rich history. And we both harvest it together and like we're in such adoration. And the bees are swarming around and we're all just like, it's a very magical experience. And then I get to take it home and distill it immediately and infuse my own ness into it, which
Yeah.
oftentimes is, it's the most beautiful time of year, but it's also like I love singing to my hydrosols and playing, like,
Mm.
if I'm
Yeah,
distilling on my
your music
porch.
is going into that. Your
Yeah. Oh,
musical
yeah.
shyness is
My
getting
yes.
expressed there. Oh, I
Yes.
love that. Okay.
Yeah. So there are definitely times, especially in the summer, where I'm like singing and dancing while distilling. You don't want to ever walk away from the still. You do not turn your back on the still because I've learned many a hard lesson in that way. Um, but you can multitask in the way of like, yeah, imparting music, having a beautiful book right there that you're reading poetry out loud. I feel like the
Mm,
vibrations in the water and the energetic
mm.
transfer of the copper in the still and, the heat and the steam and everything, they're absorbing the energy around. And so might as well put some, put my own little spin on it, which is usually singing to it. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I think, and I know that you and I have talked about this. I think that the idea that our food has a story, that all of these ingredients have a story, is a little bit more accessible than
Mm,
other stories of other goods. And I think
yeah.
that I'm just I'm really in awe of you right now as you tell
Mm,
the stories that go into, and I mean the love, the care, the magic, the consideration, the intention, and the stories that are going into Skin Fancy products. I
mm,
think I'm just sort of in awe, and I think it's really beautiful.
mm. Thank you. I love what I get to do.
Can tell.
I really do love it. Yeah.
Should we tell a little bit of a story about copper? You just mentioned it.
We should tell a little story. I keep thinking about copper and I have such a deep and profound love of copper. But
Yeah.
do you want to start?
I don't
What
know. I mean, we can just go into your love. I pulled my Usi Materia Prima. I
mm-hmm.
put there's like a little altar over here for you for
Yes.
something fancy and some copper.
Nice.
But I pulled that. But I'm curious. Because I think about copper a lot too, and I think in a very different way. And
Okay.
and I just love to know how you feel about working with this material and
Mhm.
what story it has to tell for you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I think about copper as it, and I think our thinking about it, our framing of it probably crosses in more ways than we would imagine
Oh, yeah.
because it's just it's just such a beautiful. conductor. It's such a powerful conductor and of electricity, of energy, and of life. We physically could not exist without copper, right?
Yeah.
I mean, our bodies need copper in order
Yeah,
to
our cellular, I
exist.
mean, in so many different ways, but the first thing that it's our cellular energy is very
Yeah,
much the production of ATP is it's very dependent on copper and
right.
yeah.
And I think like I don't know if you've ever walked or seen a still in person, like a copper still, or even just walked by a copper bathtub or a copper
Mm,
vessel, a copper pot. And my first instinct is always to reach out and
mm.
caress and just to
Yes.
hold and to have that exchange, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so I think,
Interesting. Me too. Yes.
yeah, and I think there's something inherent that about, it's like one of the seven, what is it? Like seven metals, original metals that were like attributed to the celestial bodies, to planets. And
Mm.
so copper is actually Venus, right? Like copper
Okay, I
is
love that.
representative of Venus, and which is, love and creativity, and and represents like femininity, fertility, womanhood.
Mm.
But a small anecdote there is that copper can also be used as a contraceptive. So it can
Yeah.
give women like femininity agency over your own, your
Wow.
own womanhood, which I
Oh,
think is
Tabitha.
really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, and so and of course, it's just like it is. I don't want to use the word magic, but it is like it creates all of the magic around us. So if we want to
Turning on that
turn,
light switch is, yeah,
yep, it's magic
magic.
right there. And I think as, our current like society, we do take it for granted so often because we're just used to it. We're used to being able to, like turn on the TV
Mhm.
whenever we want or listen to whatever song we want. And of course,
Which is
now we do that,
magic.
which is magic. Like, do you remember being a kid and you had to wake up early in the morning and turn the radio on before school and have your like record ready if you really wanted to hear that new song
Mhm,
again? And that was also magic. That was
mhm.
not shy of being magic, but now we're at this like very rapidly accelerated pace of getting to have magic at our fingertips at any moment that we want. And it is because of copper. Like it's
Yeah,
because of so many other precious metals also.
yeah,
So many other elements go into it, but copper is the main conduit. We wouldn't have
it is.
electricity currently in
And
the
there is
state that we
nothing
do.
similar to it. There is nothing
Nothing.
that
No,
compares to copper, and we've been using it for a very, very long time.
very long time.
Our relationship with copper is, I you know it, I don't know, but it is a very long-standing relationship, and it is very
Yeah.
malleable and
Hmm.
transformational. I was
Hmm.
thinking about it earlier, it tells time, right? It patinas, it
Definitely.
gets that
Yes.
verdigris, it
Yes.
changes.
I so that I did look this up recently, and there's different, scholarly thought on this, but there are tools that date back to about 9,000 BCE, copper tools, and don't quote me on that because, of course, there are archaeologists who would argue that it's closer to 8,000 BCE or maybe even three, but it's ancient. Like our use
Yeah.
of copper, our mining of copper, the practice of mining copper is as ancient as, most civilizations.
Yes.
And um, yeah, so it's pure magic. It sort of also replicates water, in my opinion. Like if
Mm.
you find native copper and, it's just like little masses or veins running through rock
Mm.
that can sort of look like streams and little bodies of water.
Yeah.
And, copper is formed through volcanic activity generally. And so
Mhm.
you have this like hot water relationship
Yeah.
with um, with copper. And so when I distill, thinking about that relationship feels really special, knowing that like the forming of a lot of this copper came from heat and hot water. And now I'm reheating hot water, into this vessel and
Mm.
evoking the memory of that water and the memory of this copper. And then like encapsulating the memory of these plants all together into this distillate.
And the copper and the hydrogen in the water interact, am I right? That
Uh,
there's some chemistry that happens there?
there's some chemistry to where it removes the sulfur compounds.
Interesting.
And so, yeah. And so that's why when you distill in a copper still versus like, a more commercial stainless steel still, you don't often get that still note or that like more sulfurous,
Mhm.
you don't have to let your hydrosol sit often when you distill in a copper still. It's
Mm.
usually it comes out sweeter and
Mm.
it doesn't have the still note and it's generally able to be used immediately. You don't have to let it sort of mature and sit. And so it reacts with the sulfur ions and just removes that gently out and it imparts its beautiful antimicrobial properties on,
Mm.
the hydrosol, which helps with preservation. And yeah, it's such a special metal. It's so special.
I
And
love that.
and I do have one funny story about the Venus copper relationship and my own relationship to it, which is I have this tattoo on my foot and it's the symbol of Venus that I got when I was 18. And it was, I was like in college, there was a discount in the, Western
Mhm.
Washington University like coupon book. And it was like, get a tattoo the size of a quarter for $25. And I was like,
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah, I have some 18-year-old.
Oh boy. Yeah.
I have okay. Yeah.
Yep. And so it was, my first year of school and my first real like awakening to the divine feminine that I really experienced in such an empowering way and learning about like the divine feminine. It was something that it wasn't part of my upbringing necessarily. Um, and so it felt really powerful at the time for me to claim that within myself. And so I was like, I'm getting that stamp on my foot and I am getting the girly symbol. And it really hurt, first of all. But, I really loved it for a long time. And then there was a funny point in my life where I was like, wow, I just have this stamp of like female on my foot. But I feel like there's so much more than just, putting um, this one symbol to like whatever, say what I am. But I was 18 and this was really important at the time. And so I just have to enjoy it for what it is. And
Mhm.
then
Yeah,
recently, this is what it is. I
covered in
have
that.
worse, I have worse tattoos than that. And also better. And also it is sweet to think about, what it is. But then recently I was looking up the symbol for copper just to know
Yeah.
that is the symbol for copper because copper is
Mm.
associated with Venus and it is the same exact symbol. And it's like, well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I will
That's pretty
reclaim
cool.
this. I will
Yeah.
just let that be a nice little full circle for me.
Yeah, that's
Um,
beautiful. I love
yeah.
that. I just can't. I'm honestly a little speechless and a little just hypnotized watching you talk about your
Oh.
relationship to these things and the stories that you have to tell about copper and about these, these plants and materials that are important to you. And I actually want to touch on that too, because you use a lot of things that are important to you. And
Mhm.
I remember getting your newsletter last fall about going to your aunt and uncle's. Is it your aunt and
Their
uncle's
cranberry
cranberry
farm.
farm?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you use cranberry and the relationship to
Yeah.
persimmons that happens in South
Hmm.
Korea and how you've continued that.
Hmm.
And these plants that uh, oils that you've gotten to know bioregionally, but also bringing in these other pieces that feel deeply personal.
Hmm. Yeah.
I don't know if there's a question in there, but there is a, I don't know. Tell me about persimmons and cranberries and working with plants that you have this deep connection to.
Well, I think for me, it means so much more when I know the plant than when when you read in a book, well, this herb is good for this thing. This is, that
Mhm,
you want to use, X, Y, or Z for A, B, and C.
mhm.
Um, and not that that isn't beautiful knowledge and not that I don't explore those relationships, but when I am personally drawn to or have a personal experience with a plant, I think it's so much deeper and so much more special to then research, not just that I love working with this plant and that I maybe love like eating and consuming and smelling this plant, but what properties does this have that can be, beneficial and helpful for, of course, skin, and also our bodies internally, and what is the process. I'm always super interested in the process and in the growing and especially in the sustainability of something. I'm
Yeah,
never interested in using something that I can't grow abundantly.
yeah,
Because obviously it doesn't make sense from like just a business perspective, but also if I start working with something that I really want to share widely, I need to be able to like
yeah.
obviously source
To
it
grow
pretty
it.
abundantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just, yeah, I think there's so much like when you infuse something, there is memory. There's memory
Mm,
of everything that went into the growing of that individual plant, or like the harvesting of the cranberries. There is no shortage of family and love every single time that we do a harvest, and hard work, and the like
mm,
deep work that my uncle and aunt put into this farm every year. And then the deep work that she does to prepare massive feasts for feeding everyone that comes to volunteer their time. But really the funny part there is like we all feel like we're getting this like really special experience. And she's like, I'm so grateful you're all here, helping with
mm.
your bodies in labor, and we all think that we're getting the better end of the deal, I think.
That's a really special exchange.
Yeah.
I've been on your aunt's side of that exchange, and
Mhm.
it's a really beautiful thing when people
Yeah.
are when the work is a gift to receive
Mhm.
as the worker,
Yes.
and when that labor is such a gift to receive as the producer,
Yeah.
there is a magic in that equation. I
Absolutely.
remember last year crying, at our neighbors and had their boys up and some friends, and they helped us put up hay. It's
Mhm.
like it was like 7 extra pairs of hands,
Oh, wow.
and
Yeah.
I was tears were streaming down my face as I was thanking them, and they were like, "This is the
Yes.
coolest thing we've ever done."
Right. Yeah. Because we all want to participate. I think I guess I don't want to speak for everyone. I want to participate in
Yeah,
the process of creating, I want to
yeah,
participate in the process of what is their farm doing? Like how can I definitely would love to distill these berries. And so if I just roll up and say, "Can I buy some berries?" I have no relationship to these berries,
mhm,
right? I have no relationship to the process. I have no idea how much work went into growing and then, harvesting. And uh, it it's okay. And it's nice when I think sourcing something in a beautiful and sustainable way in and of itself is really special. But when
mhm,
you get to have a personal relationship with the the food or the, botanical or the process, it just makes it even more special and beautiful. And that's just, it's just how I want to do things. That's the That's just the reality of it. It's how I want to participate in the work that I do.
Mm.
And while it's not necessarily like the most lucrative way, not cutting those corners is has not gotten me too far in this whole process.
Yeah.
But it also, I think that I would rather have a dedicated group of folks who really love what I do and who come back to it time and time again. And we create a relationship within that versus having a product that I have to branch out so far that it loses its special story, it loses its connection just to fill a need. And so that will be my work someday, is just figuring out how, like, where I draw that line between
Yeah.
um, if it continues to grow at the rate that it has, which, like, this is the first time I've ever been out of hydrosol,
Yeah.
like in years of distilling and, producing skincare products, even before I had a label and a brand, like just for friends and family and clients. And then after I like really launched Skin Fancy, I've never once had a gap in the amount of, a product or a hydrosol that has been available. And this year, I knew that the business had grown enough to where I needed to do another distillation this winter beyond the cranberry rosehip that I like. Everybody loves it. And then it's so juicy and it usually carries me through until May or June, generally. Like I distill enough of it to where I know I have enough to get me through that hump. Um, and this year, every single hydrosol is sold out within a month or two of its distillation. So I was like, okay, I will make sure I'll do a new distillation this year. And I'd worked with persimmon specifically before. I distilled persimmon, not the leaves, but the actual fruit. That is delicious. I use the leaves to infuse them into one of my serums, and they're so beautiful, but they're not for distilling, it turns out. But I decided to distill persimmon, and then I wanted that warmth, and then I also wanted something very wintry. And so I had also worked with Doug fir before, and I thought this will be a perfect combination. And so I released a persimmon Doug fir, and I was like, this will get me through until, whenever the whole winter, early spring, until we do the rose. And I was out like in January. Like I sold out, and I even distilled more than I thought that I would need. It was like multiple gallons. And now I'm at this gap point to where
Mm.
I feel like my customers who are waiting for this are also having to experience that tie into the seasons and
Right.
that patience that we just have, like this is a very special thing that is only available when everything wakes up. Like I can't
Yeah.
distill more persimmon and Doug fir because the persimmons are no longer fresh and ripe, and the Doug fir is no longer the peak time of harvest.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I really want to work with right now is nettles, and so that will come, but it will come next weekend, not last weekend. Like,
Yeah.
and maybe not if the weather doesn't cooperate. So, yeah. So,
And what an incredible story to I mean, I was thinking a lot as you spoke about your business. And how beautiful it is to have this business that you that you're growing together. I'm sure there are times when one or the other
mhm.
kind of outpaces, right?
Yeah. Yes.
But that it's tied to capacity of your garden, of
Hmm.
your time, of a
Right.
region.
Right.
And they're businesses. They're meant to support us. And sometimes
Hmm.
that gap can be a gap in our support.
For sure. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so I was really thinking about how beautifully you approach business, but that it's also hard.
Hmm.
And then to bring your customers into this fold of kind of in this idea that skincare might be seasonal, that there's this
Right.
seasonal component to it.
Yeah.
And so you're living in the weather with me a
Hmm.
little bit and in that patience and
Right.
I'm just really struck by that, and I think both, and I think it is hard to hold a business where you have standards that you are beautifully not willing to compromise on,
Mhm.
and that can be incredibly difficult.
Yeah. Yes. And I I think that while I think the way that I describe and genuinely feel about what I get to do and what I've been able to create out of, sort of like what is around me, which is just always sort of been important to me. I think that it looks really, really whimsical and magical and special from maybe the outside
Yeah,
viewership. And it is. And just like any agricultural endeavor that really relies on like your garden, farm, animals, seasons, it can be really difficult at times. Like that,
yeah,
I'm not growing anything in the winter, and so I really have to prepare for that. I have to prepare for the seasons of less production. Um, but also I think there's so much of that, it's like I get a lot of occasionally like, I wish I could just distill and work with plants all day. And I'm like, well, me too. I really,
Uh-huh,
that
yeah,
would be really nice.
sounds
Like,
great.
man, can I just do that part of it and not
Uh-huh,
all of the other unseen work, which is like, sometimes I think I just want to do a breakdown for all of the folks who are like, I just want to quit everything and move to the mountains and start a garden. And I'm like, okay, give
mhm,
yourself at least 4 years to really get that garden actually going, especially if you move to a really high altitude, insanely rocky landscape that actually has no garden started. Like, what a silly thing I did 4 years ago when I like
mhm.
completely uprooted and moved my whole business. I had a fifth of an acre in town, and the entire thing was a giant food and herb forest, and it was all so mature and planted up and supported the whole skincare line. And then I was like, no, we need to expand. Let's buy flat grass and somehow have fill the need for this business. And so,
And build a house
and
in
build
this
a house
phase,
and a workshop
and
and
raise
my husband's job.
children,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah, so it's not just fairy life distilling in any I mean there are days but I have to be really intentional about creating that space because there's
yeah.
also, especially when you have animals, there's like the hey, is your goat's head stuck in the fence? Like, do I
Uh-huh.
need to stop the distillation and run out and like help this?
Yeah,
Like
that's a real life problem.
or my dog's chasing the one car that came down our road for the day and like they're really creating problems for my neighbors. Like um, but then there's also just that whole unseen part of running your own business on such a small scale that you don't hire anything out, including, say, like your bookkeeping,
Yeah.
your
Marketing, getting on, social media.
social media, and like, for me, it's also just like if you break down the taxes, like I have to have four different just Washington state like tax reportings that I do, which is the wholesale, the services, the manufacturing, and the retailing, and reporting that every 30 or, not 30 days but every months, and then making sure to keep proper records so that I know where every single product in Washington goes, and then recording
Wow.
that zip code, and so
Holy
that I can
smokes.
it is so much like behind the scenes um in that way, and the licenses for like I do facials 1 or 2 days a week at my spa, and so there's the shop license and my esthetician's license, and then the business license and the city endorsement, and keeping up on all of those things,
Yeah.
making sure that they don't lapse. Yeah, it's just
Can I
it's yeah.
like, well, because those stories are in those bottles too, and I think that
Mm,
those are stories. Hmm, this is so hard to put because I don't you're in that bottle, and so these stories are in that bottle too, and I think
mhm,
sometimes we do see, I think in pretty much any industry, we just get this sort of rear window-esque pulling back the curtain and peeking in, but it doesn't mean that you
Mhm.
can see the house and what's unfolding in it, right? Whether
Right.
it's,
Right.
"Oh, I farming is just that's all I want to do and just be so amazing
Mhm.
to spend all this time outside," and and yeah, all the things that we associate it, right, are looking in on you "Oh, I
Mhm.
just wanna distill plants," and that's all it is, and not seeing
Right.
these stories, but I think that these stories matter too.
Mhm. Yeah, agreed. I mean, it's a whole piece. It's that holistic piece, the whole being of the business, like the
Yeah.
inside and the outside. Yeah, and I think that especially it's poignant in a small business or when you're supporting a small artisan or maker, you generally can pretty much assume that all of the aspects are, all of the pieces are being done by that one person.
Yeah.
And and so not to like temper your desires or expectations of what you're getting, but just to know that going into it, I guess, you
Yeah,
know?
I think to build a relationship with it, right? I mean, and
Mhm.
you've set such a beautiful example for us in this conversation of what it means to build a relationship with a plant or a region. And I think that we can extend that to, when we have a steak on the table or when we open a bottle of Skin
Mhm.
Fancy and we put it on our skin, right? There's a relationship with that process that has brought that to our paws. And
Right.
and and I think I think it's capturing not that it has to be all the time that we put on those glasses, but
Mhm.
that when we flick on that light switch, it's magic. And that
Mhm.
magic is complex and wild and we forget about it. And I think that when we open a bottle and put a couple of drops of something on our paws to put on our face, we forget about all the magic,
Mhm.
not just like the fairy sprinkle magic, but
Right. Yeah.
the fairy bureaucracy magic that
Mhm.
also
Totally. Yes.
must go into it.
Yes, and all of the hands that grew all of the different plants because I grew the botanical infusions that are so heavily infused into, say, the oils, but someone else grew the oils near me or, potentially farther away, and then pressed them and then bottled them and shipped them to me, and then I put them all together and created that final package, but it wasn't just me, and I think the beauty in that is that when you do get to have a business that supports other folks in a way that feels really good, that's part of the payoff too.
Yeah.
Like I get to support other farmers around me. I get to support other gardeners sometimes if I'm trying to find something that I might not have in abundance. And then of course I ideally if the products work well with your skin, I get to support you in that too.
Yeah.
And then you support me by continuing to let me do this work and I think that yeah, it's nice when we can find other small businesses and artisans and makers that we want to support in that way that creates that whole cycle of, every single element is supportive of the next and it all feeds
Mm.
itself and that feels pretty special.
It feels
Mm,
very special. Thank you for
mm,
building and sharing that vision. You
mm,
said that really beautifully. I think
mm,
that if we reimagined even just pieces of our economy that way more, I think
mhm.
there would be a lot more connectivity. And so thank you
I
for
think
holding
so.
that vision for us.
Mm. And less
Um,
is more in that
yeah,
always.
less is
Yeah.
more. And thriving with less, right? I mean, this piece
Mhm.
that you and I had teased out when we talked about thriving with fewer options, that sometimes that
Mhm.
that just that little thing, that rosehip seed oil, and what could I use that's here
Mhm.
is a part of what built that whole web of connectivity
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
thriving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Where do you wanna go next? Are you tired? We have been at
Mhm.
it.
We've
Like
been at it. I was just realizing it's already, I just have to
yeah.
check my phone
Yeah, I
because
wanna check in with you
yeah,
because it can be tiring.
um, my daughter is just flying in from Amsterdam.
Oh, the big trip.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm gonna just text her. Still on podcast.
because we can also I mean, there's a thousand ways we can do this, so
Yeah, no, I am actually I'm good to go, but I also want to be, what is your time looking like?
I don't have a time. I think I'll get too tired and hungry if we go too much past 5:15, 5:20 my time.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Does
That
that
feels
feel
great.
okay? Like, I think I'll just get too tuckered and too munchy.
Yeah. Well, how about I'm going to use the bathroom again, and then for me it's 1:40, so we can just try to wrap up around 2, which is 5 your
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I can go after and this has been I have to tell you, this is I have not enjoyed doing an interview this much in a long time.
Oh, well, I'm not glad to hear that, but I'm glad to hear that.
You've
You
brought a lot of
know?
magic to just this process for me and listening to you speak, and I have to say too, I'm just gonna tell you, you
Mhm.
should do a lot of these. You're a beautiful storyteller. You're also a very beautiful orator. You have no vocal vices.
Oh,
Um,
well,
which
great.
is just it's not that common.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But
Yeah,
you
I
know
don't know.
how often we don't love the sounds of our own voices, and
Oh
that's
yeah.
always been something for me. But knowing that I'm not special in that has helped.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I would
Nobody
never
likes it.
pick apart. I would never pick apart someone else's form of speaking.
No.
Like, what a dick that would be. So,
Well,
um,
I thought I'd ask you where you want to go next. I certainly have ideas, but I want to make sure that
mhm.
there isn't something that we haven't touched that is really present for you.
Yeah, well, I wrote down some notes that, I'm no good at looking at notes and talking because I've never done a podcast. So I'm not actually good at any of this yet, but I feel like I could
I'm
get
still not great
better.
at looking at notes and talking. I
Yeah.
so 110 episodes later, I'm still not great at it.
Mhm.
Mostly because I feel like it's
I think
rude.
you're pretty great at it. I will say, I was like listening to, trying to prep myself just in a way to like listen to quite a few of your
Mm,
podcasts in the last week or two, and I was like, damn, she's just so prepared and just really gives people space to say what they want to say often.
mm,
And so I think you're great at
good.
it from
Well,
a
thank
very
you.
um,
Thank you.
yeah. I think, maybe one thing that we haven't touched on is just not, I don't think necessarily that anyone is interested in like the science of the skin, but maybe just about
Yeah.
touch a little bit, and
Yeah.
just like our flexibility with our skin, and
Mm,
thinking about it more from a nourishing perspective than a preventative or changing,
yeah.
perspective, which is my always been my approach um to skincare, since I've been an esthetician and since I've been working. And I guess part of that too is that we haven't touched on maybe is like how I became an esthetician, or why that
Yeah.
actually came up, because I am so good at jumping around, and I felt like we almost touched on it and then I told a different story. Um, and then there's, the whole history of distilling, which is kind of fascinating to
Ooh.
me, but maybe not to everyone else.
Oh,
So,
that's fascinating to me also. I
yeah.
think these are all beautiful. I want to, and I have more time. I don't have to get off it.
Mhm.
But I want to make sure we honor your daughter and your time and
Yeah.
picking her up. But let's see if we can touch on both. And I think I have a good place, like a good way to tie a ribbon on things.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so
Great.
let's absolutely, I want to hear because we haven't talked about your journey as an esthetician and
Mhm.
touching skin.
Yeah.
And the sense of touch, like that skin is Thinking about copper as a conduit, that skin
Mhm.
is our conduit to experience
Oh, absolutely.
life.
Yes. I
And
mean,
yeah, take it away.
yes. Well, just like our skin isn't a great conduit of electricity, but it does conduct electricity and ties into our neural responses and feedback. And so I think that in and of itself is so beautiful. It's also so interesting to note that when our skin, when we mist it, when it's wet, it's a better conductor of
Mm.
electricity in and of
Mhm.
itself. It's also,
I
of
didn't
course,
even think about that. That
yeah,
yeah, of course.
yeah. And it's easier to absorb, of course, anything that you put onto it externally when we add, you know, of course, for me, we add hydrosol or we mist it with something but yeah, skin is, it is, of course, it's a barrier. It protects us from the outside elements, but it's so much more than just a barrier.
Yeah.
It's so much more than just this like protector from the outside, like it absorbs
Yeah,
also.
it's
And
porous.
yeah, and it's this back and forth relationship. And growing up in the time that I did, we didn't really ever have TV, but of course I was exposed to it at friends' houses. And, you go anywhere and there's a TV and you see the commercials where there's someone putting a face scrub or a very stripping like alcohol swab on their
Yeah,
face
I can still smell that
very
right now
quickly.
when you
You
said
can,
that.
yeah, I can like feel the burning. I'm like, oh,
Uh-huh.
this is great. Oh,
90s skincare.
yes, and there was no emphasis on like nourishing your skin. It was a lot more directed at stripping your skin, right? Which
Changing.
we changing, yeah. And we know now, of course, that when you strip your skin of its natural oils, you're going to produce more oils to compensate. And so you're not actually doing anything beneficial for your skin. Whereas if you sort of can help baby it and keep it in a state of homeostasis and let it do what it wants to do just naturally, but being supportive, that's the best way that we can nourish our skin.
Mm.
And not only that, but being taught this idea by advertising by society, like don't touch your face, don't touch your skin. That was a huge
Huge.
saying, don't touch your face. We were afraid to touch our faces. And and so that fear of, the oils in our skin, on our fingers or whatever it may be, interacting with our face was like, I think steered people away from connecting with their real skin on their face for so long. It was like we have to strip it and then cover it up. We want to strip and then put our makeup on or put our mask on. And not that there's not a beautiful time and a place for creating art on our faces if we feel
Yeah.
inspired, but that covering up our skin or changing it versus working with it and nourishing it and letting it be a roadmap to what is going on internally and externally with us and getting that neural feedback and massaging and massaging and massaging and stimulating our collagen production, like stimulating our circulatory system. It's such a beautiful thing that we can do for ourselves as human beings, and I'm really happy that we've moved away from that fear of touching our faces so much,
Yeah.
and that there's so many beautiful ways now that are being popularized to interact more with our skin and with our faces, and embracing that. And I think that's just such a beautiful shift and makes me happy. And it also makes me happy to be the person to introduce that concept to someone who maybe has never heard of it before, but they trust me enough to try it. And I'm like, yes, you're
I
gonna
w-
love this.
I was thinking when you said that in being an esthetician, and I know that you give facials and you have a practice.
Mhm.
I I don't think I've ever had a facial. It's very intimate to touch a
It's so
face,
intimate. Yes.
right?
It's very intimate.
I
Yep.
mean, I even think it's in some ways there's an intimacy to touching our own face, I
Hmm.
think, and again, one that we've been taught not to, and so there's a little
Hmm.
bit of I think taboo and a little bit of mortality and a little bit of, yeah, of intimacy, and then to share that with someone else. I mean, our
Yeah.
faces are so much, whether you call them a window to our soul or
Hmm.
whatever it is, it's not something that we commonly have other people touch, and just
Hmm.
what a beautiful and tender thing that
Yes.
is,
Yeah.
and what brought you into that space, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, I mean, I know for me, there was a point in my sort of motherhood journey when my son was right around 3. Before I had him, I was a single parent for a while, and then I met my husband when Bia was about 4. And I had always worked with other people's children and watched children to stay with her. And then I met Jordan, and I told him right away, I was like, I have nurtured so hard for so many years that I just want you to know I'm not having another baby anytime soon. Like, if that's something that's important to you. And this was after we, decided that we were gonna partner on up and be each other's person. And so I did. I took that break, a good solid, little break to where I did other things. I worked as like a social media, whatever it was. My job was like doing social media for Andrea Nakayama, and I went to, did the IAN program and
Mm,
just sort of like dove into a completely different world. And also studied like some complementary and alternative medicine, and just like did something that felt very nourishing to myself, which was continuing my education and studying and learning a lot. And then when I finally had Lou, he and Bia are 7 years apart. And I got the opportunity to just mother deeply in the most intuitive and supportive way that I ever have. And it was really sweet, and it was really beautiful, and we had so much fun. And I would never say just a stay-at-home parent, for any
yeah,
listeners out there, because there is so much deep work that goes into being a stay-at-home parent, period. And it was, especially if you're doing it so intentionally, it is really poignant and beautiful work, and I loved it. And we, during that time, moved into our like house in Portland, where I started my big fancy garden. And we just gardened hard, and my kids were dirty, and they were in little tubs outside, and like just they were just a part of every single bit of the process. And
yeah,
we got chickens, and we did our whole urban farm, dabbling our feet in. We'd always wanted to live out on land, but raising Bia with her dad, co-parenting, he was in Portland, and so we were sort of fixed to place.
yeah,
And so having like almost a quarter of an acre in the city on a little urban farm was the best thing that we could do. And we dove deep into it. And I was like learning to can and preserve, and making kombucha and doing all the things that I always wanted to like experiment with for myself. And then, you know, right around the time that my son was 3, I decided that I wanted to take what I had learned and move it into some sort of practice. And so I started doing some like holistic health coaching, and very quickly realized that was not for me. And I
mhm,
admire anybody who can do
me
it and
too,
make a real career of it.
me too.
Yeah.
It's not
And
for I also have a n nutrition background and
yeah,
degree, and I can't.
it's tricky. It's
It's
really,
tricky.
and it's such a personal thing, like food, and even just navigating what works for one person versus the next is so mm, complicated and deep, and it requires so much commitment on the part of the person who is trying to work with whatever they're needing, quote unquote, your help with. And yeah, I think that there are beautiful ways to do it that I just was never able to tap into.
Agree.
um, but the knowledge was there. And and then working, with herbs for a while and doing some herbal studies. Finally, I was just like, okay, I'm ready. I'm not the mother of a 3-year-old ready to dive in. I'm the mother of a 3 and a 10, almost 11-year-old. My mothering journey has been a decade long. I'm ready to have a job that feels like the thing that I want to do for, my career, whatever that
Yeah.
may be. And it doesn't have to look like anything. And it's not for anybody but myself, but I want it to be filled with plants. I want it to be filled with herbs. I want it to be filled with nutrition. I want to be able to garden for my job. How can I do this? And what kept coming up for me, which I'd never thought I would do, because you never assume that you're going to do the thing that your parents do. You
Yeah.
like, or maybe some people do, maybe they, but it was just, I'd gotten my degree at Western. I was like, well, why don't you become a teacher? Or, why don't you become whatever those
Mhm.
things are in
Mhm.
the world? And then finally I was like, well, I've always really admired what my parents did and how they, it made the business of what I want to do also seem really fun, like working in the, cosmetology industry, but putting my own holistic spin on it and somehow figuring out a way to tie my garden into it. That was my plan from the very get-go. It's like, okay, I can become an esthetician so that this validates my skincare practice. Like, I know I want to make skincare products. I've made them for a long enough now. I've grown my own herbs. I've created enough like products that work for me and my friends and my family. And I want to take this to the next level. And so, what can I do to really validate this? And something that's going to be lucrative and something that I can like make into a real career. And so, I told my parents, I think I told my mom what I was going to do. And she was like, really? Like,
Yeah.
okay. She's like, yeah, I mean, I've done this forever, but are you sure? And I was like, yes, it's in fact perfect for me, like to have that foundational knowledge and to have the confidence to be able to create my own business and then work with recipes that because she's brilliant in the way she's like, well, if you want a raw fruit mask, why don't you freeze dry some cucumber so that when you reactivate it, it's got all of the nutrients and minerals and everything,
Mm.
in there still. And we powder it and then we mix it with clays. And I'm like, yes, that is perfect. Thank you. I will grow the cucumbers. You freeze dry them. I will powder them. And funny side note there, 15 pounds of cucumbers freeze dries down to this tiny, tiny, tiny amount and then powders down to like less than a 2-ounce mason jar
Yeah.
full, so
Yeah.
it's so very potent and so very active. And
Yeah.
it's kind of wild to see that whole process where you're like, look at all these cucumbers that grew. And then you're like, wow, one tiny little pinch is like the equivalent of a full cucumber, really,
Yeah.
dispersed throughout this mass. But um,
I mean, I'm struck in the same thing with a hydrosol or an essential oil, or I mean,
mhm,
when you take away some of that water weight, there's other things too. Really get at that essence, like what a potent,
yes,
delicious
yeah.
thing. And I think again that sorry, I sometimes I get stuck on the theme of an episode, but there's again that volumetric, I
Mhm,
mean, this
absolutely.
funneling into an
Totally.
essence.
Yes, yes. And like with the hydrosol, just for a quantitative measurement, 1 ounce of hydrosol is the equivalent to 30 cups of an infused tea as far as potency
Wow.
goes.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
that
And
does.
so I feel like that really brings into perspective how very potent these, you know, I get quote unquote natural products can really be like not just potent, but they have so many actives. Like that's where actives really come from. Like how much of this actual active ingredient
Mm.
do you find in here?
That's interesting. I don't think I had ever thought about what that meant, active
Mhm.
ingredient. I think that's
Yeah.
something I've probably seen and read about, oh, I don't know, 1,000 times, and you
Mhm.
just opened something up for me that
Yes.
I had not considered.
Well, great. Yeah, it's all been such beautiful eye-opening. Like the whole exploration into all of this has been such a deep dive. Once the naivety wore off and the like, oh, maybe I can do this, and then the deep, deep, deep research came in. It was, yeah, it's all been really interesting. But coming back to the esthetician piece, I had it in my mind that if I became an esthetician and had a practice, then I would eventually be able to create a skincare line that felt like I really knew what I was talking about, not just releasing a product because I know that these ingredients all work together and fit
Yeah.
together, but releasing a product because I also know intimately how it works with the skin, and I've seen it and I've experienced it, myself, trial and error, and then slowly branched out to friends and family and then customers, and so that was, my plan. What I didn't know and what wasn't part of the plan was how much I would love being an esthetician and how much I would
Mm.
love giving facials. I had no idea that I would be not just creating, you know, that space of like comfort and healing, for lack of a better word, nourishment for someone, but that I would be getting just as much back with that exchange.
Mm.
And it's some people ask occasionally, when will you stop giving facials? And I'm like, I don't know that I ever will, even if I just only do it, once or twice a month. Like this is such beautiful, rewarding work for me.
Yeah.
And it also forces me out of my hobbit world that, I could spend 2 weeks up here never talking to another person
Yeah.
and just like kissing plants and just la la
Uh-huh.
la. And then I'm like, oh no, it's actually really important because I have this really sweet town that we've really just sunk into, that is, farther east in the gorge. We're like exactly halfway between two towns, 30 minutes to each. And I've built such a beautiful community, and I love going into town, and I visit a few different, shopkeepers every time I go into town, and we say hi and we have stories, and it's just like it feeds my soul in a completely different way, interacting with actual human beings
Uh-huh.
versus
Yep. Yep. Turns out you need to do it.
turns out it's both. And
Yep.
like I don't actually just want to be the crazy plant lady, which I'm so down to be,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but I also want to always be able to like connect with so many different folks in my community. And, of course, it's more specifically women because more women tend to come in and get facials, but there are also a few men that do, and non-binary folks. And I just, yeah, I really appreciate being able to give and receive that like touch and intimacy and the deep amount of vulnerability that is involved in a facial. There's so much trust, and
Yeah.
there's so much, it's so important. And this is something that I've developed slowly over the years of having this practice. I at first just wanted to create like a really beautiful environment that was fun and puppy and that, nobody ever felt any nervous or jitters or, I was like a lot less woo woo, for lack of a better word, than
Mm-hmm.
I am now. Like I know, and I don't love that, but it's there. It's fully there now. Like now it's just like we sink deep when we with clients that I've treated over and over again. It's like we know that we can talk and we can download the entire time if that's what's necessary, and we can listen to some like super fun music. But more often than not, folks want to come in and completely decompress, and we don't really speak much more than the first initial, like, how are you? It's so good to see you. And then we create an ambiance, and it's all about the touch and the feeling and the smell of the products and the massage. Like the
Yeah.
massage is it, and it's not just the face. I mean, I incorporate so much scalp therapy. And, if you're willing, your ears are massaged and your neck and your shoulders and your feet and your hands. And it's everything that I'm legally allowed to touch,
Mhm.
massage, and not being a massage therapist. That's included, and a lot of lymphatic drainage and a lot of just like muscle relaxation and feeling someone completely drop all guard on the table and
Mhm.
just feeling them deeply sink in. And, sometimes I'll have clients that will like audibly moan through a facial. And I love that. I love
Yeah.
knowing how much they
Yeah. Oh,
love it, how
yeah.
much they're just like, oh my God, please don't stop touching my scalp. This is not something that I've experienced in so long. We don't know what we're missing until we
Yeah.
feel it. And we're like, oh,
Mm.
we should be doing this to each other all the time if we feel safe and comfortable in this. And so, yeah, so that was a pleasant surprise within my plan of like, this is how I'm going to do it. And someday I'm going to move out to land and expand and have a skincare line. And, yeah, it's been sweet. And that is one plan that has, while I have to be very flexible within, distilling and within growing my plants that I use, it has followed a very beautiful trajectory that I'm really happy with, and comfortable with. And there's still room for growth too, which is nice. And
Yeah.
as my kids get older, there's more time. My
Yeah.
daughter now helps me. She helps
I know I've
bottle.
I've watched your stories with your daughter and just yeah, I mean, it's very expansive to see you 2 work together.
Yeah, and it's enjoyable. I mean, she's so into it, and she'll be working at the farmers market this year. She'll be running the booth alone on Saturdays so that I can continue doing facials, which I stopped doing last summer for a while, um and I really wanted to be able to do both. And this year we get to do both.
Yeah.
So yeah, being myself so infused into the skincare line definitely also, I guess, narrow focuses things in a way that I'm like, if I ever wanted to stop doing this, I can't sell the brand Skin Fancy, like
Mhm.
it would be,
There's no exit.
there's no exit.
Yeah.
And recently, and my daughter and I do this, and my son and I do too, very often, where we know what the other person is thinking. We can verbalize, or if we're having a very strong thought, it will just come out of the other one's mouth. And recently, I was thinking, what do I do if I ever want to retire? Do I just say, well, that was fun,
Yeah.
that was a beautiful endeavor. Can I somehow remove myself slowly from the brand? Is that even possible? Do I sell my recipes, or my formulations?
Mm.
And then it occurred to me, well, if Bia ever wants to take this over, she's already been interested, expressed interest, and started dabbling in it. If she ever wanted to take this over, that could be a really beautiful transition because she's also infused. I mean, she was there from the beginning.
Yeah. She was
And
the
then
impetus in some
she was the
ways.
impetus. Yeah. I mean, my own skincare journey, like I don't think that I mentioned, but my hormones took a deep dive after having her. And I had eczema and psoriasis patches both pop up, like just skin disorders, that nothing was helping topically. Like it was a different time. Of course, this was 16 years ago, but I was trying to source out the most natural products because I'm very sensitive to synthetic ingredients.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, nothing was helping. And so that was kind of the beginning of just starting to formulate. It's like,
Yeah.
well, let's do some research. What can I put on myself and her? And it turns out, of course, it's not always just a topical band-aid. Like you need to figure out what's going on inside of your gut. And for
Mhm.
me, it was the first time I even knew what gluten was, like
Mhm.
nursing her. And I finally I got to see a naturopath who was $20 per session if I went to the naturopathic school of medicine and like saw the doctor and then a team of students. And so I had this whole beautiful team of like students learning and the doctor was seeing. And
Mm.
I was like, why does she have these little patches? And they said, well, have you thought about what you eat and what, are you breastfeeding and what's going into her body? And they were like, well, are you willing to potentially remove gluten? And I was like, sure. What is that?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, and so that was my like very early on. Like I thought I knew a lot about food, but I didn't
Yeah.
know a lot about. I just knew what tasted and felt good. And so um turns out removing gluten also helped my own skin issues and then also like my nervous system, finding ways to calm that in early motherhood. And So yes, she was the impetus, but it really beyond the nervous system and the food, gut connection to the skin, like finding things topically that did help to soothe the inflammation was really the beginning for the both of us. But so recently she said to me, Mom, what do you think if someday I take over the skincare line? This was like a day after I'd been thinking heavily
Mm.
on it, but not wanting to bring it up to her because she's 16,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. You
and I'm
don't
like,
want to.
you
Yeah.
don't want to, you don't know what you want to be when you grow up, quote
Yeah.
unquote. And there's a billion things that you should really explore. And I was like, well, just trying to pretend like it. I hadn't even thought of it before. But
No
I
big
was like,
deal.
it's fine. You think I'm cool? Like what? But she started diving into, she was like, yeah, I don't think that you could like ever sell this company. And I've already started working here. And so I think that could be really sweet. And I think we could work together. And she's really, really interested in perfuming and like chemistry
Mm.
and learning about distilling, but from a more scent, like creating
Mm.
perfumes
Yeah.
specifically. And she was like, yeah, maybe we can slowly add perfumes and you
Mm.
can be the grower and the distiller and I can take the business over someday. And so that was whether or not that ever happens for
Yeah.
us, it was a really sweet roundabout. It was just such a sweet moment to know
That's
that
so.
what we do together feels really special to her too, and that she's enjoying it and she's learning so much, running
Yeah.
of like the farmers market booth and running a point of sale system on her own and the interface and the talking to people. And she's so dang good at it too. I mean, she's such a babe. And so people are like, yeah, whatever you're using, I would like to look 16 again, I guess. Give me your glass skin. So
Mm.
that's helpful for me because I'm much more of the, I guess I'm just when it's your own product, it's harder to sell sometimes, I think, or
I
to
find
like
that. Yeah.
pop up. Yeah.
Yeah. I
I'm
find
just
that.
like, yeah,
It's
it's an
it's
oil,
doing other people's dishes is the way I
Oh,
look at it.
yes, yes, absolutely.
Your
I would love
dishes,
that. Yeah.
ugh.
Yep.
Other people's dishes? Ooh, would
hmm
love to
Yeah.
come help you with
Sure.
your
Yes.
dishes.
And then you get
Um,
to walk away. You're not invested. But
yeah. I
yeah.
I think to kind of begin to kind of tie a ribbon on this part
hmm
1.
Sure.
To tie a ribbon on part 1.
Yeah.
One of the things, so a couple of things kept coming up, and I was thinking about, we talked about talking about the history of distillation, and if you wanna
Oh,
touch on
right.
that, you can, but I'm gonna kinda tie these 2 things together
hmm
because I think that one of the things that I heard sort of embedded in all these different stories that you told is what it means to transform again and again and again as a person in all of these different seasons and to have a sense of adaptability and going with the flow even in the face of when you have a plan and you thought it might be different. and to feel into what that flow is, to have that sense of intuition. And I was thinking about that. So that's one little piece.
And
And then
to
I was,
trust that intuition is, I think, key.
yes,
And
to trust.
it doesn't just naturally happen always. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes you are raised
Mm,
in a way that you might not trust your own instincts or your intuition or your nervous system's reaction. Um,
mm,
and it's such a beautiful part of aging, I think, that can come with trusting your intuition. And it's a beautiful part of being thrust into motherhood, maybe when you
yeah.
weren't quite ready or expecting it, is to you have a reason to trust your intuition all of a sudden. And
Mm.
so, yeah,
Do you think that's continued to deepen for you?
absolutely. I question myself so much less if I know something to be true, and more just if I know something to be true intuitively.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I hope that that continues to deepen and that I continue to expand and trust that as I move through time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I'm excited to see where that can go. I'm excited to trust myself more and know myself more the older I get. And I love knowing that the little girl that was me at one point on this nonlinear time
Yeah.
plane would be so excited to know the older woman that she was going to become. You know, the little girl that was in the woods playing with sticks and making potions and like always had to be near a creek or a tree or a flower. Even if we were in the city, I would seek out like as much nature as possible. Um, and I always wanted to be a witch and to make, concoctions and to like that was the dream.
Yeah.
And I didn't think necessarily that was a real job, or that you
No.
could do that
Why
when
would
you were
you?
grown
Yeah,
up.
I don't
Yeah,
think that's
I was
something
like,
that was presented.
no. Although I, was raised with parents who did sort of just fashion their own lives and had their own businesses, and so I it should have maybe been a little more clear to me, but it wasn't. And my daughter, when she told me that she wanted to someday maybe take over my business and she wanted to be a perfumer, she was like, I never like up until just the last few days, it didn't occur to me that I could do this. I always thought that I would have to go to a school and then to choose a job and to be something, but I don't know why, because you and Jordan don't have traditional jobs. Like my husband's a metal fabricator and he has his own shop, and we have created our own, stories. And so I resonated with that. I was like, yeah, I remember that feeling of thinking that you had to choose a thing. And
Yeah.
it's nice to continue to expand in a way to where you realize none of it is real. We're all just making up our own stories as we go and trying to fit them within the constraints of society and how best to work within that, for better or worse. And yeah, so,
Mm.
yes. Did that answer the question that had nothing to do with what I went into?
It did. I mean, it answered. It was what was present for you, and I think that's all that matters. And I mean, first of all, your husband's a metal worker, and that's something that I'm again making notes for future. Um,
Yeah. There's a
for
whole
future,
thing. There's a whole
there's a
thing there.
whole thing there.
Yeah, you're like
Um,
Hephaestus.
there's a whole
Yeah.
thing there. And I
Yeah,
think that the history of distillation is something that maybe we should get into
sure.
in a part two too, because
We're out of time.
we don't have to be like out of, but you have to pick up your daughter and
Well, Jordan's picking her up in town. So I don't actually, they'll be home in the next probably 20 minutes or so, but I'm not in a rush either. So I don't know if talking about the history briefly could can be copied and pasted
it
into
can
earlier,
it
if
can
you think that would be poignant or.
It depends. I think it's what you want, and I think that there
Mm,
is definitely a part 2 piece here to me. I mean, if it's something that you're open to, because there's a
sure,
lot that
yeah.
I want to explore.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that I want to go deeper on if you would be so willing. I think because you
Yeah.
have a really beautiful way of being in the world that I find very expansive, and I know that other people will too.
Mm.
That
Thank you.
there's a lot of you have a very beautiful ability to articulate your inner experience in a way that is wise and accessible and tangible.
Mm, mhm,
That is very special. I don't have the quite the right words for it, but it's very special. And
well, I'll
it's very
take it.
resonant.
Thank
I
you.
think that you have a sort of conduit aspect of I mean, and this episode was for me so much about transformation.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I think we touched a lot on transformation and expansion and paring down also within that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just expanding and contracting and changing and the
Mhm.
changing. And I think about where we started this with alchemy and that you transform these ingredients, but you shared so much about how you yourself have been able to transform from season to season of life
Mhm.
too.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I think it I never looked at it as being able to transform, but I like that.
Mm. Mm.
It was always more of just, yeah, that we work within what we're given, sort of the context.
Mm.
And so um there's that, but then there's also the piece that has been really poignant for me, which is understanding that I can also create my own story,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
And that like there's that whole I guess you could call it manifesting. But there's that whole piece to where okay, this is your story, these are the parameters. What magic can you make? How can you expand within this framework?
Mhm.
What can you do while you're here? Like, this is your story. And so how do you want to write it? And I've felt more agency over that the older I've gotten, and I love that. Like I love feeling more rooted while also feeling while also feeling more rooted while also understanding that we're also very changeable. And so enjoying being in time and place when I am here and knowing that I can enjoy that wherever I go. If somehow this all changed, if Wanderlust
Yeah.
took over and we decided to move to Spain in a
Yeah.
couple of years, and start fresh, like that would also be wonderful and okay. And yeah, and so I do love the ability to be fixed and to soak up every single moment within a time and a place and a phase and then move on to the next one
Mm.
if you need.
Do you think that through our conversations prior to this, we talked a lot about savor, and I'm wondering if your ability to savor those moments, to be present and savor it, I'm wondering if it allows you to be able to take those moments with you and to, okay,
Mhm.
I've received these deeply. I've tasted them. I've
Yes.
smelled them.
I think as long as I smell them, yes. If
And now
I
I can shift.
yes, yeah, if I have that scent memory and I can hold it inside and bring it with me anywhere I go, I'm okay to move on to another space, especially if it's a beautiful scent memory, and whether that be the smell of my baby's heads. And so I'm okay with them getting older. I don't need them to stay tiny forever
Yeah.
because I spent literal hours every single day just holding and smelling them whenever I had the chance. And like thinking about that while it was happening and thinking, I need to remember this because someday I won't have this experience and it
Mhm.
will be gone. And I want to remember how beautiful this is, and not in a sad nostalgic, but in just a
Mm.
beautiful nostalgic way of like, wow,
Ooh.
I got this. I've had a few moments in my life just in the last few years. And I feel really grateful for this place because of that, this time and place that we're in now, and for my really beautiful partnership with my husband that allows this. And with my beautiful relationship with my kids and with this land and, my plant relatives everywhere here. But I've had this thought that, okay, if this all ended today, right now, I would feel fully satisfied with the life I've lived, you know? And I never knew that that was a thought that I would ever have. I didn't necessarily know to think it. I didn't I didn't know that I wouldn't have it, but I've lived a life that I wanted to, and it's been a life of struggle and financial hardship and physical hardship, but it's also been so deeply beautiful that I wouldn't feel like I was missing anything if I wasn't here tomorrow. And I think I've loved enough and enough people have loved me that my memory would carry on
Yeah.
within that, and I'm okay with that. So that's been pretty special, just to know that I live in this place that sometimes feels like Mordor, but often feels like the Shire. I mean, it's physically, like
I
it's
know.
physically like you want to just throw it all away and move to an apartment in the city every once in a while. Like it's
Oh,
not
yeah.
easy. It's not easy. You don't know how you're
The
going to
burn it all
afford the
down
next
vibes.
project. Yes, like fuck it, I will just go. But
Mhm.
then there's the moments where you're like, look at what we've been able to create and look at all of this beauty surrounding us, and this is where I want to be right now. And this is what I want to be tending. These are the humans and the animals and the plants and the insects and and the community that I want to be tending. And so I'm so happy to be tending this. So yeah.
That was you asked a couple of times, you put the rhetorical at the end of it, and I'm not sure that I do, and you just gave me a
Oh,
lot to think about, and I
oh,
think that was a really yeah, I'm gonna be thinking about that whole piece for a hot minute. I'm
mm,
gonna take with me beautiful nostalgia, which you just opened a door. I experience sad nostalgia often,
mm,
or sort of in the moment where you know that you need to savor it, and I experience
mhm,
that as a sort of sadness, and I'm going to take away the possibility of that being beautiful,
mm, mhm,
and I'm going to take away the possibility of what it means to have the sort of savoring satisfaction and that you just described.
mm. Just like this is enough.
This
Like
is enough.
this is enough. It's simple, but it's enough. And
Mm.
I don't want or need anything else but this right here.
Yeah.
It's a special, special feeling, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it really sounds like it. I
Mhm.
think in some ways this is a beautiful place to begin to wrap it up, but I
Sure.
wanna check
Yeah.
in with you, like, that's a really beautiful, uh, what you just said is I mean, it just hit me very deeply, and I don't really have words for it, and so
Mhm.
I wonder if that's a good place to leave listeners too,
Yeah.
and maybe with the promise of more depth in part 2.
Sure. We can just dangle. We can give
Yeah,
just give a little.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious how you feel about that, though.
I'm fine with
Okay.
that. I think that's great. I think we've talked about so much, and I'm like looking at my notes and I'm like, oh, there's so much more we could talk about, but
And
maybe
there's
that is for
time
another time, you
and
know?
space for us to do that.
Yeah.
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 Um, Where should we send people to find you? I'll have really thorough show notes too.
Mhm.
Um, but where
Yeah.
can people find you? And is there any, you know, thing that you want to say about that? I know it's doing your own dishes
Right,
to
totally.
market, but
Yeah. I mean, I do very, very little marketing, but I do have a website, skinfancy.co, and all of my products are on the website, and then descriptions of services and listings of retailers there if you happen to be in like the three areas where you can physically find them.
Mhm.
And then Instagram, Skin Fancy is,
Yeah.
yeah, totally. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll
Yay.
talk soon. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Yeah.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
rest of your evening.
I will.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mind, Body, and Soil podcast. If what you found resonated with you, may I ask that you share it with your friends or leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts? This act of reciprocity helps others find Mind, Body, and Soil. If you're looking for more, you can find us at groundworkcollective.com and at Kate_Kavanaugh, that's KATE_KAVANAUGH on Instagram. I would like to give a very special thank you to China and Seth Kent of the band All Right, All Right for the clips from their beautiful song Over the Edge from their album The Crucible. You can find them at All Right, All Right on Instagram and wherever you listen to music.